Welcome to my channel Midnight Stories, where you find horror stories that scare you. Before watching, please press like to support me in producing more stories. This helps in spreading the video and reaching more people. Thank you for your support and enjoy watching. The summer of '88 felt different from the start. Maybe it was the way the heat shimmered off the asphalt, or how the radio kept cutting out between towns, leaving me alone with my thoughts. My name's Doug Henderson, and at 43, I'd finally decided to take that big road trip across the Southwest I'd been dreaming about since I was a kid, reading National Geographic magazines in my parents' living room. It took 18 months of saving every spare dollar from my job at the machine shop in Cleveland, but I'd finally done it. Bought myself a used '82 Winnebago Brave, fixed her up nice, and hit the road. Just me, that old RV, and enough saved vacation time to make it count. The Winnebago wasn't much to look at, cream-colored with a faded brown stripe down the side, some rust around the wheel wells, but she ran solid. I'd spent weekends getting her roadworthy, replacing the fuel pump, fixing the AC, making sure the propane system was safe. My ex-wife Barbara used to say I was too cautious, always planning 3 steps ahead. Guess that's why I survived what happened next. Big Bend National Park wasn't actually my first stop. I'd meandered down through Oklahoma, made a brief stop in Amarillo, then cut south through Texas. The park had been on my radar ever since I'd read about it in a travel magazine at my dentist's office. Something about those photos of the Chisos Mountains rising up from the desert floor like ancient guardians spoke to me. I rolled into the park late on a Tuesday afternoon in early June. The visitor center was getting ready to close, but I managed to grab a map and chat with one of the rangers, a weathered guy named Miller. He marked out some good camping spots and hiking trails, warned me about keeping my distance from wildlife, especially the mountain lions. "You camping alone?" he asked, giving me what I now realize was a concern once over. "Yeah, just me," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. He nodded slowly. "Stick to the marked trails. Desert's got a way of turning around even experienced hikers. And make sure you've got plenty of water. Heat'll sneak up on you out here." I found a decent spot to park the RV in the Basin campground, nestled among some scrubby junipers. The sun was setting by then, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple I'd never seen back home. The silence hit me first, not the peaceful kind, but the absolute absence of sound that makes your ears strain for something, anything familiar. That first night, I sat outside in my folding chair, nursing a beer and watching the stars come out. Back home, you'd be lucky to see a handful of stars through the city lights. Out here, it was like someone had scattered diamonds across black velvet. The Milky Way stretched overhead, a river of light that made me feel small in a way I couldn't quite explain. I should have paid attention to that feeling, that sense of being diminished by the landscape. The desert doesn't care about human plans or precautions. It's got its own rules, its own justice, and I was about to learn them the hard way. I woke early the next morning, before the sun had cleared the mountains. The air was still cool, and dew had settled on the RV's windows. I made myself a quick breakfast, instant coffee and oatmeal, and started packing for my hike. 2 gallons of water, trail mix, beef jerky, a couple of sandwiches I'd made the night before, basic first aid kit, flashlight with fresh batteries, spare flashlight, map, compass, lighter, basic survival gear, just like the guidebooks recommended. The Outer Mountain Loop Trail looked promising on the map, challenging enough to be interesting, but not technical enough to require special gear. The ranger had mentioned it was a good day hike if you got an early start. 14 miles round trip, marked well enough that even a newcomer like me shouldn't have trouble following it. The first few hours were exactly what I'd hoped for. The trail wound through stands of desert oak and pinyon pine, occasionally opening up to reveal vast expanses of the Chihuahuan Desert stretching away to the horizon. I passed a few other hikers early on, a young couple with matching backpacks, an older man with a walking stick who nodded as we crossed paths. Normal stuff. Tourist stuff. It was around noon when things started feeling off. I'd stopped for lunch in the shade of an overhanging rock, watching a pair of hawks circle overhead. The temperature had climbed into the high 90s, but I still had plenty of water, and I was making good time. According to my map, I should have been about halfway through the loop. That's when I noticed the first oddity, a piece of torn fabric caught on a thorny bush just off the trail. It was dark blue, maybe denim, and looked relatively fresh. Not sun-bleached like you'd expect if it had been there long. I probably wouldn't have thought twice about it, except for what I saw next. A single boot print in a patch of sandy soil, heading off trail into a narrow side canyon. The print was clear, fresher than the fabric. Someone had passed through here recently, walking with purpose away from the marked path. Against my better judgment, I stood there studying it. The sole pattern looked military style, like combat boots, not your typical hiking gear. I should have turned around right then, should have marked the location on my map and reported it to the rangers. But something about that boot print nagged at me. It was headed in the wrong direction, away from water, away from the campgrounds, into one of the most isolated parts of the park. I stood there longer than I should have, studying that boot print. The desert wind whispered through the canyon, stirring up little dust devils that danced across the rocks. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, like a splinter under my skin that I couldn't quite reach. The sun had shifted, casting deeper shadows in the canyon. I checked my watch, 1:47 p.m. Still plenty of daylight. But in the desert, things can change fast. I took out my camera, an old Nikon I'd brought along for vacation photos, and snapped a few pictures of the boot print and the scrap of fabric. Maybe I was being paranoid, but something told me I might need proof later. Following the tracks was easier than I expected. Whoever left them wasn't trying to hide their passage. The boots had left clear impressions in patches of sandy soil, and occasional scuff marks on the rocks showed where they'd climbed. They led deeper into the canyon, away from any marked trails. After about 20 minutes, I came across the first camp. If you could call it that, a blue tarp, shredded by wind and sun, flapped weakly from where it had been tied between two stunted trees. Scattered around were the remains of someone's life. A Coleman stove rusted beyond repair. Food tins opened with what looked like a knife rather than a can opener. Clothes reduced to sun-bleached rags. My first thought was that some hiker had gotten lost, set up camp, and what? The scene didn't match that scenario. There was something deliberate about the way things were arranged. This wasn't the panic of a lost hiker. This was someone who had stayed here, lived here. That's when I noticed the smell. Anyone who spent time in the desert knows it smells. Sage after rain, sun-baked rock, creosote bush. This was different. Sickly sweet, like meat left too long in the sun. I'd smelled something similar once, years ago, when a deer had died near my hunting blind. The source wasn't hard to find, though I wish to God it had been. Behind a cluster of rocks, partially hidden by desert scrub, lay what remained of a human body. The desert heat and scavengers had done their work, leaving mostly bones and scraps of clothing. A hiking boot, still laced, lay a few feet away. I've never been a religious man, but I found myself whispering a prayer, not for myself, for whoever this poor soul had been. They'd died alone out here, far from help, far from anyone who loved them. That's when I heard it, the scrape of boot on stone. I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs. There, at the edge of the clearing, stood a figure that haunts my nightmares to this day. Tall, gaunt, with wild hair and a matted beard that reached his chest. His clothes might have once been hiking gear, but now they were a patchwork of tears and crude repairs. But it was his eyes that grabbed me, pale blue, almost colorless, and completely, terrifyingly sane. He knew I was there, had probably been watching me since I left the main trail. In that moment, I understood something. I wasn't the first person he'd watched this way. The scattered camps, the bodies, this was his hunting ground. Neither of us moved. The wind had died, leaving us in a bubble of absolute silence. His right hand held something, a hunting knife, the blade darkened with age and use. I could see similar knives tucked into a makeshift belt around his waist. Trophies, maybe, or just tools of his trade. Then he smiled. Not the wild grin of a madman, but something worse. The satisfied look of a craftsman about to begin his work. I ran. I'd like to say I had a plan, that I made smart decisions in that moment. Truth is, blind panic took over. I scrambled back the way I'd come, my boots slipping on loose rocks, thorns tearing at my clothes. Behind me, I could hear him following, not running, just maintaining a steady pace, like he knew the desert would do most of his work for him. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for me like grasping fingers. I lost the track I'd followed in, took a wrong turn somewhere. The canyon walls all looked the same. The landmarks I'd noted earlier twisted into unfamiliar shapes. My lungs were burning. The water bottles in my pack sloshed with every step, reminding me that I was losing precious fluid through sweat. He was still back there. I could hear the steady crunch of his boots on gravel. Unhurried, patient. I had to think, had to push past the panic. The ranger station was, where? North? The sun was setting to my left. So that meant, my thoughts scattered like startled birds. I was lost, running blind in the desert heat, while the killer followed at his leisure. Something my father used to say came back to me then. When you're being hunted, become the hunter. He'd been talking about deer stalking, but the principle was the same. I was doing exactly what the killer wanted, running scared, getting more lost with every step. I forced myself to stop, ducking behind a large boulder. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. I took several deep breaths, trying to slow my racing pulse. Think, Doug, think. The killer knew this territory, knew it well enough to hunt here, to hide bodies where they wouldn't be found. But that also meant he had patterns, habits. The scattered camps I'd found weren't random. They were like spider webs, places he'd return to again and again. I pulled out my map with shaking hands, tried to mark where I'd found the first body, where I'd seen him. A pattern emerged. He was hurting me, I realized, using the canyon walls to guide me toward something. The next hour was a deadly game of cat and mouse. I'd move carefully, quietly, then stop to listen. Sometimes I'd hear him moving parallel to me. Other times there was only silence. The sun was setting now, painting the canyon walls blood red. I found another camp as darkness fell. This one was different, fresher. A small fire pit with ashes that still held warmth. Scattered around were more personal effects. A woman's backpack, a camera similar to mine, a journal with entries that stopped abruptly 3 days ago. The last entry made my blood run cold. Saw someone watching from the ridgeline today. Ranger said no one lives out here. But I heard movement behind me. He was closer now. But I was ready. The panic had burned away, replaced by a cold, calculating anger. This ended tonight. I won't detail everything that happened next. Some things are better left in the desert darkness. But I will say this, when the moment came, it wasn't like the movies. There was no dramatic showdown, no witty one-liners, just two men in the desert night. One who killed for pleasure, and one who killed to stop him. I used his own territory against him. The Rangers found us the next morning, found him, what was left of him, and found me, dehydrated but alive. They found the bodies too, eventually. 7 of them, scattered across his hunting ground. The woman from the journal, a school teacher from El Paso, a German tourist. Others who'd never been reported missing. The official report called it self-defense, said I was lucky to be alive. They were right about that last part, at least. But they don't know about the choice I made in those final moments. Don't know that I had an option to walk away, to let the Rangers handle it. Sometimes at night, I still see those pale blue eyes, still feel the weight of that decision. The desert changed me, showed me that there's a fine line between hunter and hunted, between justice and vengeance. I sold the RV after that. Couldn't stand to look at it anymore. These days, I stick closer to home, work my shift at the machine shop, try to live a normal life. But sometimes, when the wind blows just right and the stars are bright enough, I remember that night in the desert. Remember that sometimes the only justice you get is the justice you make yourself. They never did identify him. No matches in any database. No missing persons report that fit. Just another ghost in the desert. But I know he was real. The scars on my arm prove that. And sometimes, when I catch my reflection in the mirror, I see something in my own eyes that wasn't there before. Something that reminds me of pale blue eyes in the desert dark. The year was 1993, and I was helping my buddy Mason renovate an old farmhouse deep in rural Louisiana, about 40 miles outside of New Orleans. I was 24 then, still green behind the ears and always looking for adventure. Most folks call me Travis, and back then I was working construction jobs across the South, picking up whatever work I could find. The housing market was booming, and there was good money in renovation if you knew what you were doing. Mason had bought the place dirt cheap at auction, a foreclosure that had been sitting empty for nearly 3 years. He was always tight with money, preferred to do everything himself rather than hire professionals. That's where I came in. We'd worked together on a few projects in Mississippi, and when he called about this place, I figured why not? Stay rent-free, make some cash under the table, and help out a friend. The farmhouse itself was a classic Louisiana raised cottage style, probably built in the 1940s, with a wraparound porch that had definitely seen better days. The white paint was peeling, showing gray wood underneath, and half the shutters were hanging crooked or missing entirely. But it had good bones, Mason insisted. The foundation was solid, the roof mostly intact, and miracle of miracles, the plumbing still worked. We'd been there about a week, sleeping on air mattresses and living off microwave dinners, when everything went to hell. That first week of June was brutal, the kind of thick, wet heat that makes you feel like you're breathing through a hot washcloth. The mosquitoes were so bad we had to wear long sleeves, even in 90-degree weather, and the nearest neighbor was a good 3 miles down the road. Our only company was the constant chorus of cicadas and the occasional visiting alligator in the drainage ditch out back. The night it all started, I remember every detail with the kind of clarity that only comes from true terror. It was a Thursday, and we'd spent the whole day ripping out rotted floorboards in the kitchen. Mason went to bed early, exhausted from the heat and work, leaving me restless and craving a drink. The house didn't have air conditioning yet. We were planning to install window units that weekend, so I was sitting on the porch, trying to catch whatever breeze I could find. I remembered seeing an old corner store about 5 miles back toward the highway, one of those places that looked like it hadn't changed since the 60s. Figured a 6-pack and some chips might help me get some sleep. The drive out there was eerie. No streetlights, just my headlights cutting through the darkness and the occasional reflective eyes of animals in the ditches. The store was exactly what you'd expect. Ancient gas pumps that still showed prices in whole numbers, faded advertisements for cigarette brands that didn't exist anymore, and a buzzing neon sign that read Pete's Grocery with half the letters flickering. Inside wasn't much better. The fluorescent lights hummed and flickered, casting weird shadows across dusty shelves stocked with off-brand everything. The smell hit me as soon as I walked in. That peculiar mix of stale cigarettes, mold, and something else I couldn't quite place. The man behind the counter matched the store perfectly. His name tag said Pete, or he looked like he'd been standing there since the place opened. Thin, greasy hair combed over a balding spot, permanent scowl etched into his face, yellowed wife-beater showing under an unbuttoned plaid shirt. He barely looked up from his newspaper when I walked in, just grunted something that might have been evening. I grabbed my beer and chips, paid without making eye contact, and got out of there as fast as I could. Something about that place made my skin crawl, though I couldn't have said exactly why at the time. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe just nerves from being in a strange place. Either way, I was glad to be back in my truck. The drive back seemed longer somehow. The darkness felt thicker, more oppressive. I kept catching movement in my peripheral vision, shadows darting between the trees. Probably just raccoons or possums, I told myself, but my knuckles were white on the steering wheel. That's when I saw her. She stumbled out of the ditch like something from a horror movie, waving her arms frantically. My heart nearly stopped. Not many folks walk these back roads, especially not at that hour. I slowed down, my curiosity fighting with a creeping sense of unease. As I got closer, I could see she was young, probably around my age, wearing what looked like it had once been nice clothes, now torn and caked with mud. Her eyes were wide with terror, reflecting my headlights like a trapped animal's. "Help me!" she gasped, already yanking open my passenger door before I'd completely stopped. "Please, he's going to kill me." She scrambled inside, bringing with her the smell of swamp water and fear. I hit the gas, adrenaline making my hands shake on the wheel. "Who?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who's trying to kill you?" "My ex," she stammered, chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. "He's crazy. Violent. He won't stop until—" She choked back a sob, and I got my first good look at her in the dim dashboard light. Her face was a map of fresh scratches, some still oozing blood. A bruise was darkening around her left eye, and her bottom lip was split. But it was her eyes that got me. They held the kind of desperate, pleading fear I'd only seen once before, when my kid sister had come to me about her abusive boyfriend back in high school. The kind of fear that tells you someone isn't just scared of getting hurt, they're scared of dying. We were about a mile from the farmhouse when headlights appeared in my rearview mirror, gaining on us fast. The woman, I still didn't know her name, let out a strangled scream. "That's him." The vehicle behind us was big, maybe an old Bronco or Blazer, and it was moving like something possessed. Every time I swerved, it matched me. When I slowed down, hoping it would pass, it slowed too. This was no ordinary domestic dispute. My gut was screaming that this was something much worse. We reached the gravel driveway of the farmhouse, and I took the turn so fast we fishtailed, spraying rocks everywhere. Mason must have heard us coming because he stumbled outside in his boxers and a threadbare t-shirt, looking confused and irritated. "Travis, what the hell?" he started to say, then saw the woman hunched in my passenger seat and the vehicle careening down the driveway toward us. "Get inside," I yelled at both of them, fumbling with the house keys. Mason grabbed the woman's arm and practically dragged her through the front door. I was right behind them when I heard the crash. The Bronco had taken out our mailbox and was now sitting at an angle across the end of the driveway. Engine still running, a figure emerged from the driver's side, and my blood ran cold. He was massive, well over 6 feet tall and built like a linebacker. In the moonlight, I could see his muscles rippling under a filthy wife-beater. His long black hair matted with what looked like mud or blood, but it was his face that stopped me dead. His beard was wild and unkempt, covering most of his features, but his eyes, God, his eyes were like looking into an abyss, pure black, with a predatory gleam that seemed to glow in the darkness. The woman was whimpering now, pressed into a corner of our bare living room. Mason had positioned himself between her and the door, but I could see his hands shaking. I wasn't a fighter, never had been, but this was my friend's house, and there was an innocent woman depending on us. I grabbed the only weapon I could find, an old fireplace poker we'd found earlier that day while cleaning. The man stepped onto the porch, and the whole house seemed to groan in response. His grin was something out of a nightmare, revealing teeth stained yellow and brown. When he spoke, his voice was like gravel being crushed. "Give me the girl." "Over my dead body," I replied, trying to sound braver than I felt. The poker felt pathetically inadequate in my hands. He took another step forward, and I swear the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "That can be arranged." I tried reasoning with him, though I knew it was pointless. "Look, whatever's going on here, we can work it out. The police are probably already on their way." That last part was a lie. We hadn't had time to call anyone, and the nearest station was at least 30 minutes away. He moved faster than something that size had any right to move. One moment he was on the porch, the next he was through the doorway, swinging a massive fist at my head. I managed to dodge, barely, and swung the poker in desperation. It connected with his ribs with a solid thunk, and he stumbled back, more surprised than hurt. "Run!" I shouted at Mason and the woman. "Get to the car." They made a break for the back door while the man was still off balance. But he recovered quickly, and suddenly his hand was around my throat, lifting me off the ground like I weighed nothing. I clawed at his fingers, but they were like steel cables. Black spots started dancing in my vision as he squeezed. Then came the sound that would echo in my nightmares for years to come. The deep, bone-shaking boom of Mason's old shotgun. The man roared, his grip loosening just enough for me to wrench free. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, and looked up to see the woman standing in the doorway, the shotgun steady in her hands. Her eyes had changed. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with something harder, colder. She fired again, and this time the shot found its mark. The man staggered backward, clutching his shoulder, dark blood seeping between his fingers. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at the woman with those terrible black eyes. Then, without a word, he turned and ran, vanishing into the darkness like a nightmare at dawn. The next few hours were chaos. The police finally arrived, their red and blue lights painting the old farmhouse in alternating colors. They took our statements, photographed the scene, and asked the same questions over and over. One of the deputies, an older man with kind eyes, looked at the woman with growing recognition. "Your name wouldn't happen to be Sarah Miller, would it?" She nodded slowly, something like resignation crossing her face. The deputy's expression softened. "We've been looking for you. There's been an incident. Your family." He paused, clearly struggling with what he had to say next. "I'm so sorry." Sarah's face crumpled like paper in a fist. The wail that came from her throat wasn't human. It was the sound of a soul being torn apart. Mason caught her as her knees gave out, holding her while she sobbed against his chest. I stood there, useless, my throat still burning from where the man had grabbed me. Over the next few days, we learned the full story in bits and pieces. The man, Sarah's ex-boyfriend, had shown up at her family's house looking for her. When they wouldn't tell him where she was, the police report used words like multiple homicide and extreme violence. Oh, but we all knew what that meant. Sarah had been staying with a friend when it happened, and she'd been running ever since. They never caught him that night. Over the following weeks, there were sightings, a shadow moving through the swamp, footprints in the mud behind gas stations, missing livestock. But nothing concrete. The police increased their patrols in the area, but we all knew it was useless. In that part of Louisiana, with its endless swamps and back roads, a man could disappear forever if he wanted to. Sarah stayed with us for a while. Mason insisted, and I backed him up. We took turns keeping watch at night, the shotgun always within reach. But gradually, things quieted down. The police presence dwindled. Life in our little corner of the bayou returned to its usual rhythm. Sarah eventually moved on to where, I'm not sure. Some things are better left unknown. Mason and I finished renovating the house that summer, though neither of us ever felt completely comfortable there again. I moved on to other jobs, other towns, trying to put that night behind me. But sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night and see headlights in my rearview mirror, I remember those black eyes, that inhuman grin, that gravelly voice. They never did find him. You know, sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, moving through the shadows of the bayou like a ghost. His real name was probably something ordinary, John or Bill or Mike, but to those of us who were there that night, he'll always be the butcher of the bayou, a reminder that true evil doesn't need supernatural powers or ancient curses. Sometimes it wears a human face and drives a beat-up Bronco down dark country roads, waiting for someone to stop and help a stranger in need. I still wake up sometimes, sheets soaked with sweat, that laugh echoing in my ears. And I wonder, how many other Good Samaritans has he found since that night? How many other lives has he destroyed? But mostly, I wonder if Sarah ever found peace, if she ever managed to build a new life from the ashes of her old one. I hope so. God, I hope so. Because the alternative, that he found her again, that those black eyes were the last thing she ever saw, that's too horrible to contemplate. So I try not to think about it. I try to forget the sound of that shotgun, the smell of blood and swamp water, the way the moonlight gleamed off his yellow teeth. But some things, you never really forget. Some nights just stay with you forever, no matter how far you run. And sometimes, on dark nights when the wind whispers through the trees just right, I swear I can still hear that gravelly voice, "Give me the girl." It's a reminder that evil isn't always supernatural. Sometimes it's just a man with dead eyes and bloody hands, waiting on a dark road for someone kind enough to stop and help. Every small town has its secrets. Most are harmless enough, affairs everyone pretends not to know about. Old feuds passed down through generations, the usual stories that give these places their character. But Whisper Falls? Our secret has teeth. I've worked for the Whisper Falls Sheriff's Department since '92, back when this was just another quiet mountain town in Colorado. Population 247 at last count, though that number's been dropping steady these past few years. Can't say I blame folks for leaving. Some nights, when the wind comes howling down from the peaks and that sour smell drifts through town, I think about joining them. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You want to know what happened that night in 2008? What started all this? I'll tell you, though I doubt you'll believe me. Hell, some days I barely believe it myself. It began with the Reeves family, mother, father, 2 kids who vanished off the canyon trail that May. Search and rescue combed those mountains for a week. All they found was a single hiking boot, child-sized, the laces tied in perfect knots. No blood, no signs of struggle. Just gone, like they'd been plucked right off the face of the earth. 2 weeks later, the Hendersons disappeared. They lived up near the old ski resort, had this nice little cabin with a view of the valley. Margaret Henderson was the type who'd call the station if a deer so much as looked at her garden funny. When nobody heard from them for 3 days, we knew something was wrong. I remember walking through that cabin, everything in its place, coffee cups still on the kitchen table, TV guide open to that week's listings. Their car was in the driveway, keys hanging by the door. The only thing out of place was the back screen door, hanging crooked on its hinges, and that smell, like meat left too long in the sun, mixed with something chemical and wrong. Sheriff Mills, he retired last year. Moved to Arizona, he wrote it off as mountain lions or bears. Natural predation, he called it, though there weren't any tracks. No blood, nothing that pointed to animal activity. But what else could it be? We're trained to look for rational explanations, and sometimes that training blinds us to what's right in front of our faces.
June 19th.
I remember the date because it was my daughter's birthday. She lives in Denver now. Won't come visit anymore. Can't say I blame her. I was working late, catching up on paperwork. Small department like ours. Everyone wears multiple hats.
Deputy.
Dispatcher. Janitor, whatever needs doing. The station's an old brick building from the 50s. 2 stories with bars on the windows and more creaks than a haunted house. Around midnight, I heard something out back, in the alley where we keep the dumpsters. Probably raccoons, I thought, grabbing my flashlight. Didn't even take my gun, that's how routine it seemed. The alley was dark, just a single security light casting more shadows than illumination. That smell hit me first, stronger than I'd ever encountered it before. Like roadkill left to rot in August heat, but with an underlying chemical tang that burned the back of my throat. My flashlight beam caught something moving behind the dumpster. Something pale and wrong. Have you ever seen those deep-sea creatures? The ones that look like God had spare parts left over and just stuck them together? That's what this thing reminded me of. Only worse. It unfolded itself. That's the only way I can describe it. Rising up from behind the dumpster like a time-lapse video of a plant growing. Only fast and horrible. 7 feet tall if it was an inch. With limbs like stripped tree branches, too long and too thin to support its mass. The skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over visible bones in some places and hanging in loose folds in others. But the head, Christ. The head, bulbous and hairless, like a bloated corpse left in water. The eyes were huge, bloodshot orbs that reflected my flashlight beam like a cat's, but red instead of green. Its mouth. I still have nightmares about that mouth. It opened like a flower blooming, revealing row after row of needle-sharp teeth. The sound it made was like nothing I'd ever heard before. A wet, bubbling hiss that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside its chest. I dropped my flashlight. Stupid. I know. But in that moment, all my training went right out the window. My hand went to my hip, but my holster was empty. I'd left my gun on my desk, right next to the half-finished incident report about Mrs. Patterson's missing garden gnomes. The creature moved like something between a spider and a gymnast, its limbs bending in ways that human joints just can't. I ran, not proud to admit it, but I ran like hell, hearing those clicking footsteps behind me, that wet breathing getting closer. I burst out onto Main Street, where a group of tourists was leaving the Rusty Nail, our local attempt at a fancy bar. They were laughing, probably drunk, completely oblivious to the nightmare chasing me. I tried to warn them, my voice cracking as I shouted. The creature exploded out of the alley behind me. In the streetlights, it looked even more impossible, its skin almost luminescent. One of the tourists, a woman in high heels, screamed and fell. The others scattered, leaving her there like extras in a bad horror movie. What happened next? I've replayed it in my head 1,000 times, wondering if I could have done something different. The creature pounced on her like a cat on a mouse, those spindly arms wrapping around her body. Her scream cut off abruptly as that horrible mouth descended. The gunshot surprised everyone, including the creature. Old Harold Harris, who ran the pharmacy on the corner, was standing on his second-floor balcony with a hunting rifle. He'd always seemed like a quiet old man, the kind who'd give kids free candy and tell long stories about the good old days. Turns out there was more to him than that. The creature jerked back, dark fluid oozing from a wound in its shoulder. It made that horrible hissing sound again, but this time there was pain in it. Then, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move, it snatched up the woman in its jaws and retreated into the darkness. Harris called down to me, told me to come up to his apartment. I should have gone back to the station, called for backup, followed procedure. Instead, I climbed those narrow stairs to his second-floor apartment, my legs shaking so bad I could barely manage it. The apartment smelled like medicine and old books. Harris poured me a generous measure of whiskey from a bottle he kept behind his counter, for medicinal purposes. We sat there in silence for a while, watching the street below through his window. Finally, he started talking. "They come in cycles," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "Every few decades, when the barriers get thin. My grandfather fought them back in 42. Lost his arm and his sanity doing it." "What are they?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Harris shook his head. "Don't rightly know. Some folks say they're from another dimension. Others think they're what's left of the things that were here before us. All I know is they're hungry. They're smart. And they're patient." He told me about the old copper mine, abandoned in the 30s after a series of accidents that were never properly explained. About how his grandfather and a group of other men had sealed something in there, something that had been eating miners one by one. "The seal's wearing thin," he said. "Has been for a while now. That's why they're coming back." We sat up all night, taking turns watching the street. The creature came back twice more, testing us. Each time, Harris's rifle drove it away. By morning, I was exhausted, terrified, and facing a truth I didn't want to accept. Monsters were real, and they'd chosen my town as their hunting ground. The official investigation went nowhere. Of course. The tourist's body was found 3 days later up near the ski resort, or what was left of it. The official report called it a bear attack. People wanted to believe that. It was easier than the truth. I tried to tell the sheriff what I'd seen. He put me on administrative leave, said I was suffering from stress and trauma. Maybe I was, but that didn't make what I'd seen any less real. Harris became my mentor of sorts. He'd been preparing for something like this his whole life, collecting information, maintaining a small arsenal in his back room. My grandfather's legacy, he called it. We started patrolling together, watching for signs. More people disappeared. More animal attacks were reported. The town started to empty out. I lost my job with the sheriff's department. Couldn't blame them. Really, a deputy who talks about monsters isn't exactly good for public relations. But I'd found a new calling. Harris and I became the town's unofficial guardians. Though most people just thought we were crazy old men with guns. Harris died 2 years ago. Heart attack. Nothing supernatural about it. But he left me his rifles, his notes, and his responsibility. The creatures are still out there. I've learned more about them over the years. They're intelligent, capable of planning. They can mimic human voices, luring people out of their homes. They prefer to hunt at night, but they're not limited to darkness. And they're getting bolder. The town's different now. Population's down to less than 1,000. The ski resort closed last year. Most of the shops on Main Street are boarded up, but some folks stay. Maybe they're too stubborn to leave. Or maybe they know, deep down, that someone needs to stand guard. I'm not the man I was 10 years ago. My hair's gone gray. My joints ache when it rains. And I've got more scars than I care to count. But I'm still here, still watching. The creatures are patient, but so am I. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I sit on Harris's old balcony with one of his rifles across my lap. I watch the shadows move against the mountains and remember what he told me that first night. The thing about monsters, Ben, is they can be fought, they can be killed. But first, you have to believe in them. I believe. God help me, I believe. Deputy Benjamin Walker was found deceased in his home on September 12, 2018, 3 months after providing this statement. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure. His body was discovered with a loaded rifle in his hands, and all windows and doors were found to be heavily barricaded from the inside. The current population of Whisper Falls, Colorado, according to the most recent census, is 526. I am a long-haul trucker, and I've been one for 15 years. My name is Eli Markham. The road has been my home, my office, and my constant companion. I've seen just about everything you can imagine on America's highways: accidents, wild animals, strange lights in the sky, and people at their best and worst. But nothing in those years prepared me for what happened on that stretch of Montana highway. It was late October, and I was hauling a load of industrial equipment from Seattle to Minneapolis. The route took me through some of the most isolated parts of Montana, where towns are little more than dots on a map, and cell service is a luxury you can't count on. The sun had started its descent behind the mountains, painting the sky in deep purples and oranges that would have been beautiful if I wasn't so focused on making good time. The radio had been cutting in and out for the last hour, finally giving up entirely and leaving me with nothing but static. I switched it off, settling into the familiar hum of my engine and the rhythmic sound of tires on asphalt. The temperature was dropping fast, typical for Montana this time of year, and I could see my breath starting to fog the windows slightly. That's when I saw it, a car on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking weakly in the growing darkness. It was an old sedan, maybe early 2000s model, dark blue or black. It was hard to tell in the fading light. As a trucker, you develop a sort of sixth sense about these situations. Sometimes people genuinely need help, and sometimes they're setting up for something else entirely. But in these remote areas, ignoring someone in trouble could mean leaving them to freeze to death. I slowed my rig, checking my mirrors as I pulled onto the shoulder about 50 feet ahead of the car. The engine's idle seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness. I grabbed my flashlight and phone, although I already knew there was no signal. Force of habit, I suppose. The hood of the sedan was up, but there was no steam or obvious signs of mechanical trouble. No footprints in the light dusting of snow on the shoulder, either. That was the first real warning sign. If someone had been working on the car, there should have been tracks. I approached cautiously, my boots crunching on the frozen gravel. The driver's side door was slightly ajar, and that's when I saw them, bullet holes. Not just one or two, but a whole pattern of them across the passenger side. Small dark stains on the upholstery that I knew instinctively weren't oil or coffee. My heart started hammering in my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to get back to my truck. But I was rooted to the spot, staring at the evidence of violence that had played out who knows how long ago. The car was cold. Whatever had happened here wasn't recent. That's when I heard it, the sound of footsteps on frozen ground, coming from the tree line to my right. I turned slowly, my flashlight beam cutting through the growing darkness to illuminate a figure emerging from the trees. He was tall and thin, wearing layers of weather-beaten clothing that made it hard to determine his actual build. But it was his face that caught my attention, gaunt, almost skeletal, with deep-set eyes that seemed to reflect my flashlight beam like a cat's. He moved with an odd, jerking gait, but there was nothing uncertain about his direction. He was coming straight for me. I backed away slowly, trying to keep both the stranger and the car in my field of vision. He said nothing, made no gesture of greeting or threat, just kept advancing with that same unsettling determination. The distance between us was closing far too quickly. My back hit the side of the sedan, and that contact broke whatever spell had kept me frozen in place. I turned and ran for my truck, no longer caring if I looked foolish or paranoid. The sound of my boots on gravel seemed deafening, but I couldn't hear if he was following. I didn't look back to check. I reached the cab and yanked the door open, practically throwing myself inside. My hands were shaking so badly I fumbled with the keys twice before managing to get them in the ignition. As the engine roared to life, I caught movement in my side mirror. The stranger was running now, covering ground with impossible speed. I threw the truck into gear and hit the gas. Gravel sprang from my wheels. The heavy rig responded slowly, too slowly, and I could hear something hitting the side of the cab, hard impacts that shouldn't have been possible from human fists. The sound moved along the side of the truck, heading toward the back of the cab. The CB radio crackled to life with a burst of static that made me jump. Through the white noise, I heard what sounded like words, but distorted, backwards, meaningless. I switched it off with a shaking hand. Looking in my mirrors, I could no longer see the stranger. The sedan's hazard lights continued their steady blinking, growing smaller as I picked up speed. I should have felt relief, but instead, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Something felt wrong, very wrong. That's when I heard it, breathing. Not my own panicked gasps, but someone else's slow, deliberate breaths coming from the sleeper compartment behind me. My blood turned to ice. I couldn't look back, didn't dare take my eyes off the road, but I knew with absolute certainty that I wasn't alone in the cab. The next 10 miles were the longest of my life. I drove with white-knuckled intensity, taking curves faster than I should have, praying I wouldn't encounter any black ice. The breathing continued, sometimes punctuated by what sounded like quiet laughter. Finally, I saw lights ahead, a small town, barely more than a wide spot in the road, but it had a police station. I pulled into the lot, tires screeching, and jumped down from the cab without even turning off the engine. I burst into the station, probably looking like a madman, gasping out my story to the startled dispatcher. 2 officers went to check my truck, while a third tried to calm me down enough to give a coherent statement. When they returned, their faces were grim. They'd found nothing in the sleeper compartment, but the back of the cab showed signs of tampering, deep scratches in the metal that hadn't been there before, and smears of something dark that could have been blood or mud. They told me about Thomas Hewitt, a local man with a history of violent behavior who'd been spotted in that area before. They'd been looking for him for months, ever since a string of disappearances along that stretch of highway, but they'd never found him, never even come close. I spent the night in that town, in a small motel with bars on the windows. The next morning, I gave a formal statement and then continued my route. But something had changed. The road didn't feel the same anymore. That was 3 years ago. I still drive trucks, but I changed my routes to avoid Montana entirely. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving through particularly remote areas, I'll catch myself checking the mirrors for movement behind me or straining to hear breathing over the sound of my engine. I never saw Thomas Hewitt again, never found out if that was really who I encountered that night. The police never found the sedan either. When they went to investigate, it was gone, leaving only tire tracks in the frozen gravel. The thing that haunts me most isn't the stranger's unnatural speed, or the impossible strength behind those blows to my truck. It's the breathing I heard in my cab, because sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wonder if it ever really stopped. Sometimes, when I'm alone in my truck late at night, I could swear I still hear it, that slow, deliberate breathing coming from just behind me. I've learned to live with it. Mostly, I keep driving because it's what I know, what I'm good at, but I don't stop for broken down cars anymore, no matter how guilty that makes me feel. And I never, ever drive that stretch of Montana highway after dark. The road teaches you things. If you survive long enough to learn, it taught me that the line between helper and victim is razor thin, and that some mysteries are better left unsolved. Most importantly, it taught me that the real horrors aren't the ones in campfire stories or urban legends. They're the ones that follow you home, breathing quietly in the darkness behind you, waiting for you to let your guard down. I still drive the long haul, but I do it differently now. I keep my doors locked, my CB radio turned off after sunset, and my eyes firmly fixed on the road ahead, because I know now that the greatest danger isn't always what you can see in your headlights. Sometimes it's what's riding along behind you, breathing in the darkness, just waiting for another chance. The highway stretches endlessly before me now, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the heart of America. I've taken to keeping a detailed logbook, not just of miles and stops, but of everything unusual I see. Most truckers would call it paranoid, but it helps me feel in control. It helps me convince myself that what happened that night in Montana was an isolated incident. Last week, I picked up a load in Idaho, heading east towards Chicago. The client was a technology company, shipping servers and other equipment I couldn't name. Everything was going smoothly until I hit South Dakota. The sun had just set, and a fog was rolling in from the fields, not unusual for that time of year. I was passing through a particularly remote stretch when my dashboard light started flickering. Just slightly at first, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. But I notice everything these days. The engine temperature gauge began to climb, though the engine itself sounded fine. That's when I spotted the gas station ahead, its lights a dim glow through the thickening fog. 3 years ago, I would have pulled in without hesitation. Now, I found myself gripping the wheel tighter, my eyes scanning the empty parking lot. The station looked operational, but something felt off. There were no other vehicles, not even a clerk's car visible. The price board showed numbers that seemed too low for current rates, and the fog seemed to curl around the building in unnatural ways. I drove past. The engine temperature continued to climb for another mile before suddenly dropping back to normal. The dashboard light stabilized. In my mirrors, the gas station's lights grew dimmer until they disappeared entirely in the fog. Later, I looked up that stretch of highway. There hasn't been a gas station at that location for over a decade. These things happen more often now, or maybe I'm just more attuned to them. I notice patterns that others might miss, like how certain stretches of highway seem to stretch longer at night than they do during the day, or how sometimes, when I check my mirrors, the landscape behind me doesn't quite match what I remember passing. The other truckers at rest stops share their own stories now. They didn't used to. These things weren't discussed except as jokes or tall tales. But something has changed. More drivers are reporting strange encounters, mysterious vehicles that follow at a constant distance before vanishing, hitchhikers who don't show up in dash cam footage, roads that aren't marked on any map. I met another driver in Nebraska who had his own encounter on that same stretch of Montana highway. He described a similar scene, an abandoned car, a strange figure, that same unnatural speed. But in his story, he never stopped. He watched in his mirrors as the figure paced his truck for miles, matching his speed exactly, before finally falling behind. The police never found Thomas Hewitt. Sometimes I wonder if that was even his real name, or if the local police just needed to put a name to what was happening on their highways. I've researched him extensively, spending countless hours in libraries and online forums during my off hours. The stories go back decades, but the details are inconsistent. The only constant is the location, always that same stretch of highway. I've developed routines, rituals almost. I check my mirrors exactly every 30 seconds. I never drive with the radio on after dark. I keep my doors locked even when fueling up. I've installed additional lights on my rig, ensuring there are no blind spots around the cab. The other drivers notice, but they don't comment. Many of them have their own rituals now. The trucking companies are starting to notice too. There's been an increase in drivers requesting route changes, avoiding certain areas. Insurance claims for unexplained damage to vehicles have risen. Dashcams malfunction more frequently on certain stretches of road. But what can they do? The goods still need to move, And the highways don't give up their secrets easily. I've thought about quitting, finding a job that keeps me in one place. But the road has its hooks in me now. More than that, I feel a responsibility. Someone needs to map these dark places, to warn others about what lurks in the spaces between cities. Someone needs to remember what happened on that stretch of Montana highway, and all the other places where the normal rules of reality seem to bend. Last month, I passed through a small town in Wyoming. At a diner, I overheard locals talking about missing persons cases in the area. They mentioned an old sedan, dark blue or black, with bullet holes in the passenger side. They said it appears on the highway at dusk, hazard lights blinking. No one who stops to help is ever seen again. I wanted to tell them my story, to warn them about what I'd seen, but I knew how it would sound. Instead, I left a note with the waitress, containing everything I'd learned about staying safe on these highways. I don't know if anyone will heed the warnings, but at least I tried. The road ahead of me stretches into darkness, and my next delivery is waiting. I check my mirrors one last time, 30 seconds exactly, and adjust my route to avoid Montana. The sun is setting, and somewhere out there, hazard lights are blinking on an empty highway, but not for me. Not tonight. My logbook sits open on the passenger seat, its pages filled with dates, times, and locations, patterns that might mean nothing, or might mean everything. The weight of the pen in my pocket is reassuring, a reminder that I'm documenting these things, creating a record, because someday, someone else will see what I've seen. They'll need to know they're not alone. The engine hums steadily as I accelerate onto the interstate. In my mirrors, the city lights fade into darkness. Above me, stars wheel slowly across the sky, their ancient light offering cold comfort. I am alone on the highway, but not really alone, never really alone anymore, because now I know what's out there, in the spaces between cities, in the gathering darkness beyond my headlights. I know about the things that wait on empty highways, wearing familiar shapes but moving with impossible speed. I know about the breathing in the darkness, the scratches on metal that shouldn't be possible, the roads that stretch too long in the night, and most importantly, I know that sometimes the best thing you can do is keep driving. Keep your eyes on the road ahead, your doors locked, and your logbook updated, because out here, in the dark places between cities, the only way to survive is to keep moving. The night deepens around me as I drive, and somewhere in the distance, hazard lights begin to blink. The dream started about 6 months after that night in Montana. They're always the same. I'm back on that highway, but something's different. The colors are wrong, like looking through a dirty lens. The abandoned sedan is there, but when I approach, the bullet holes begin to bleed. And behind me, always behind me, those footsteps getting closer. I've learned to live with broken sleep. Most truckers do, eventually, but these dreams feel different. They leave me with a sense of unfinished business, like I'm missing something important. That's why I started investigating. It began with small things, newspaper archives, local history books, conversations with old-timers at truck stops. I created a map, marking every strange occurrence, every unexplained disappearance along that stretch of highway. The pattern that emerged was unsettling. Every 7 years, like clockwork, the reports would spike, strange figures on the roadside, cars that appeared and disappeared, drivers who went missing, their trucks found abandoned, engines still running. The pattern stretched back decades, well before Thomas Hewitt was supposedly active in the area. I reached out to other drivers who'd had similar experiences. Most wouldn't talk at first, but eventually, they opened up. Their stories shared common elements: the sudden appearance of a vehicle in distress, the figure approaching with unnatural speed, the sensation of being followed long after the encounter ended. One driver, an older man named Roy, shared something that chilled me to the bone. He'd been driving that route since the 1970s, and he remembered the original incident that sparked the local legends. A highway patrol officer had disappeared while investigating an abandoned vehicle. When they found his car 3 days later, the interior was covered in deep scratches, and the dashboard clock was stuck at 12:41. The time matched exactly when I'd first spotted the sedan that night. I started carrying a camera, documenting everything unusual I saw on the road. Most of the photos show nothing out of the ordinary: empty highways, abandoned buildings, the usual landmarks of a trucker's life. But sometimes, in the background, there are things that don't quite make sense. Shadows that fall in the wrong direction. Figures that seem to shift position between frames. The other drivers have noticed changes in me. They see the cameras, the notebooks, the maps covered in annotations. Some think I'm crazy, obsessed with ghost stories and urban legends. Others understand all too well. We've formed an informal network, sharing information about safe routes and places to avoid. Last week, I received a package at one of my regular stops. Inside was a stack of old photographs, their edges yellowed with age. They showed various locations along that Montana highway, spanning several decades. In each photo, barely visible in the background, was the same dark sedan. The postmark was from a town that doesn't exist anymore, wiped off the map by economic decline and forgotten by all but the most detailed atlases. I still drive the same routes, minus Montana, but I'm more than just a trucker now. I've become a chronicler of sorts, documenting the strange and inexplicable things that happen in the spaces between cities. My logbook has grown into several volumes, filled with dates, locations, witness accounts, and my own observations. The scratches on my truck have never fully healed. The body shop couldn't explain them, said they'd never seen metal tear quite that way. Sometimes, late at night, I swear they glow faintly, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. I've learned to ignore it, just like I've learned to ignore the occasional sound of breathing from my empty sleeper cab. Other drivers seek me out now, especially the newer ones. They've heard stories about the man who survived an encounter on the Montana highway. They come looking for advice, for warnings about places to avoid. I tell them what I can, share what I've learned. Most importantly, I tell them to trust their instincts. The road has its own rules, its own logic, and sometimes survival means knowing when to break policy and keep driving. The technology has changed over the years: GPS systems, automated logging devices, advanced communication tools, but they don't make us any safer. Not really. If anything, they give us a false sense of security. The dark places are still out there, waiting. The things that hunt on empty highways don't show up on any satellite map. I keep driving because it's what I do, but also because I'm searching for something. Answers. Maybe. Or just understanding. Each mile brings new questions, new patterns to analyze. The notebooks pile up, filled with observations and theories. Sometimes I catch myself hoping I'll find that sedan again, that I'll get another chance to uncover the truth. But then I remember the sound of those footsteps on frozen gravel, the impossible speed of that gaunt figure, the breathing in the darkness behind me, and I know that some truths come at too high a price. So I keep driving, keep watching, keep documenting. The highway stretches endlessly before me, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the heart of darkness. My headlights illuminate only a small portion of what's ahead, but that's all I need. 1 mile at a time, one night at a time, always moving forward, because out here, in the spaces between cities, movement is life. And somewhere in the gathering darkness, hazard lights are blinking, waiting for the next traveler who doesn't know the rules of the road. The sun is setting now, painting the sky in familiar shades of purple and orange. I check my mirrors, exactly 30 seconds, and adjust my route. The logbook sits open beside me, ready to record whatever this night might bring. The engine hums steadily beneath me, a reassuring sound in the gathering darkness. And somewhere, in the back of my mind, I hear the echo of footsteps on frozen gravel, getting closer with impossible speed. I've spent 23 years on the road as a trucker, but nothing comes close to what happened during that Montana run. The memory still sits heavy, like a stone in my gut. Writing this down feels necessary, even if no one believes it. The day started routine enough. I was hauling refrigerated goods from Seattle to Minneapolis, my regular route. Montana stretched endless ahead of me, I-90 cutting through the heart of Big Sky country. The cab of my Peterbilt was quiet, except for the low rumble of public radio and the occasional static-filled chatter from the CB. Construction forced me onto a state highway, somewhere east of Billings. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the prairie grass. The detour added hours to my route, but dispatch had already cleared the delay. Nothing to do but settle in for the long haul. That's when things started getting strange. The highway seemed to stretch forever, dead straight through endless fields. No towns, no turnoffs, not even other vehicles. Just endless prairie grass swaying in the wind. The isolation started getting to me after a while. Every trucker knows that feeling when the road hypnotizes you, makes you see things that aren't there. I needed a break. Found a turnout, barely wide enough for my rig. While taking care of business, I noticed something odd by the roadside. A small cairn of rocks, maybe 2 feet high. Could have been a survey marker, except for the strange decorations, strips of cloth, bits of bone, colored string tied in complex knots. Probably some local thing, I figured. Plenty of reservations in Montana, but something about it felt wrong. The placement seemed deliberate, like it was waiting for someone to stop. I've seen plenty of roadside memorials in my time, but this was different. No flowers, no crosses, just those strange decorations moving in the wind. The sun was setting fast when I found the rest stop. Standard setup, gravel lot, few other trucks already parked for the night. I was dead tired, running on coffee and willpower. Did my usual evening routine, microwave dinner, logbook entry, quick check of the weather forecast. Everything normal, until it wasn't. The sound woke me around 2 a.m. At first, I thought it was just the wind, maybe some loose tarp on another truck. But it was too regular, too deliberate. Something was moving around my rig, making contact with the metal sides. My first thought was bears. We get them sometimes at rest stops, looking for food. But this didn't sound like any bear I'd ever encountered. The scratching continued, circling the truck, then footsteps, heavy ones, shaking the whole cab. Training from my police days kicked in. I grabbed my flashlight and gun, standard equipment for long-haul runs. Through the windshield, I saw movement. Tall figure, maybe 7 feet. Couldn't make out details in the dark, but something was very wrong with its proportions. It reached for the door handle. The metal groaned. I didn't wait to see what happened next. Started the engine and got out of there fast. Didn't stop until I crossed into North Dakota, pulling into a brightly lit truck stop near Dickinson. In the morning light, everything seemed different. No damage to the truck. No evidence anything had happened. Could have been exhaustion. Road hypnosis. Bad truck stop coffee. That's what I told myself anyway. But here's the thing that still bothers me, that cairn by the roadside. I've asked other truckers who run that route. None of them remember any construction, any detour. The state highway I took doesn't show up on my maps. Trust me, I've looked. Sometimes late at night, when I'm driving through empty country, I think about what I saw. Was it real? Some twisted game played by locals? A hallucination brought on by too many hours behind the wheel? I don't know. But I've changed my route since then. No more Montana runs. No more lonely highways after dark. The road teaches you things if you listen. Sometimes it's better not to know what's out there in the empty spaces between towns. Sometimes a detour isn't just a different way to get somewhere. It's a door to somewhere else entirely. I still drive, still make my deliveries. But I keep my high beams on at night now, and I don't stop at unmarked rest areas anymore. The memory of those footsteps, that twisted metal, it stays with me. Reminds me that even after all these years on the road, there are things out there I can't explain. The incident changed more than just my routes. I started noticing things I'd overlooked before, like how certain stretches of highway seem to swallow radio signals, or how some rest stops feel wrong even in broad daylight. Other drivers notice it too, though most won't talk about it. There's this one stop in Wyoming I still use, run by an old Vietnamese woman named Mai. She's heard every trucker story there is, keeps coffee brewing 24/7. One night, after that Montana incident, I found myself telling her what happened. Expected her to laugh it off. Instead, she just nodded, like she'd heard it all before. "Road takes people sometimes," she said, refilling my cup. "Been running this place 30 years. Drivers disappear. Trucks found empty. Nobody asks questions anymore." She told me about a driver who came in one morning, shaking so bad he could barely hold his coffee. Said he'd been driving through Nebraska when his GPS went dead. Ended up on some unmarked road that wasn't on any map. Saw things in his headlights he couldn't explain. By the time he found his way back to the interstate, 3 days had passed. His logbook showed only 8 hours. The more I listened to other drivers' stories, the more patterns I noticed. Always remote highways. Always at night. Always when you're alone. Some blame fatigue. Others talk about government experiments or ancient burial grounds. Me? I try not to theorize anymore. Theories lead to obsession, and obsession gets you killed in this job. I've developed rules since then. Never take unmarked detours after sunset. Don't stop if you're the only truck in sight. Keep moving if your radio starts acting up. Simple stuff. But it's kept me alive. Last year, I was hauling produce through Idaho. Middle of nowhere, storm rolling in fast. Lightning lit up the sky like a broken fluorescent bulb. That's when my GPS started glitching. Screen showed me on some road that didn't exist, then went black entirely. Radio died next. Even my phone showed no signal. The smart move would have been to pull over. Wait out the storm. But those rules I mentioned, they're written in stone now. I kept driving. Hands tight on the wheel. Eyes fixed on the white line. Storm got worse. Rain so heavy I could barely see past my hood. But I didn't stop. Something moved in my mirrors. Large shape, keeping pace with my truck. Could have been another vehicle. Except no headlights reflected in the rain. It stayed with me for 20 miles. Always just at the edge of visibility. Then the storm cleared as suddenly as it had started, and whatever it was disappeared. Next morning, my GPS showed I'd stayed on the interstate the whole time. But my fuel gauge told a different story. I'd burned through nearly a full tank in what should have been a 4-hour drive. The weirdest part? My delivery was still on time according to my logbook. I've thought about quitting, finding some local route that keeps me close to home. But the road gets in your blood after a while. Besides, someone needs to warn the new drivers. Not about the things that might be out there. That just makes them paranoid. No, they need to learn the rules. The real ones. Not the ones in the manual. Mai keeps a journal behind her counter, filled with stories from drivers who've seen things they can't explain. She lets me read it sometimes, when the coffee's fresh and the night is quiet. Some of those stories match what happened to me. Others are worse. Much worse. There's a theory among older drivers. They say the roads we drive aren't always the same roads we started on. That sometimes, especially at night, the highways cross over into somewhere else. Somewhere the maps don't show and GPS can't track. Most drivers who end up there come back changed. Some don't come back at all. I don't know if I believe that. What I do know is this. The American highway system is vast, empty, and largely unexplored at night. Millions of miles of asphalt cutting through darkness, connecting places that most people never see. And sometimes, in that darkness, there are things that defy explanation. The incident in Montana wasn't the end of my story. It was just the first time I noticed what was always there, hiding behind the ordinary facade of truck stops and mile markers. Now I see it everywhere, in the shadows under overpasses, in the strange lights on distant hills, in the faces of drivers who've been on the road too long. Last week, I passed through Montana again. Daytime run, different route. Saw a turnout that looked familiar. For a moment, I thought about stopping, checking if that cairn was still there. But some mysteries are better left unsolved. Some roads are better left untraveled. Instead, I kept driving. Eyes forward, radio on, watching the sun set in my mirrors. 'Cause out here, between the places everyone knows, there's another America. It exists in the spaces between map lines, in the static between radio stations, in the darkness beyond your headlights. And sometimes, if you're not careful, it reaches back. The trucking community is tight-knit, especially among us long haulers. We watch out for each other. After what happened in Montana, I started paying more attention to the CB chatter, especially Channel 19. You hear things there that never make it into official reports. 2 months ago, I was running a regular route through Nevada. Middle of the night. Empty stretch of US 50. They call it the loneliest road in America for good reason. CB crackled to life with a distress call. Driver sounded young, panicked, said his instruments were going haywire, couldn't get a read on his location, asked if anyone could verify his position. I checked my GPS, should have been about 30 miles ahead of me. Told him to stay put. I'd catch up and guide him to the next town. But when I reached the coordinates he'd given, nothing. No truck, no tracks, not even brake dust on the asphalt. Called it into highway patrol, but they found nothing too. 3 days later, his truck turned up at a rest stop in California. Tank was full, logbook blank, driver nowhere to be found. His company did an investigation, claimed he must have abandoned his route, but I'd heard his voice that night. Man wasn't planning to abandon anything. Mike keeps track of these disappearances, says they happen in cycles, like seasons. She's marked them all in her journal, dates, locations, patterns that don't make sense unless you've seen what's out there. Sometimes I help her plot them on a map. The resulting pattern looks like a web, or maybe a trap. There's this one spot in Utah she warned me about. Junction of 2 minor highways. Middle of nowhere. Looks normal enough on maps, but every few years, someone vanishes there. Local police blame it on the terrain. Easy to get lost in those canyons. But Mai showed me her records. Every disappearance happens under the same conditions. Clear night. Full moon. Driver alone. I've changed since Montana. Become more cautious, more observant. Started keeping my own journal, recording things that don't add up. Like the truck stop outside Reno that appears on no official maps. But every driver knows it's there. Or the stretch of I-80 in Nebraska where watches run backward for exactly 17 miles. Last winter, I picked up a load in Seattle bound for Chicago. Weather was bad, heavy snow, ice on the roads. Made it as far as South Dakota before the storm forced me to stop. Found this small truck stop, just a few pumps and a diner. Place looked old, but well-maintained. Kind of spot you'd remember. Inside, met another driver, older guy, probably in his 70s. Had this 1,000-yard stare I've seen before. We got talking over coffee, and he told me about his last run through Montana. Said he'd seen something similar to what I encountered, but back in 1976. Same description, same behavior, same impossible height. That shook me. All this time, I'd been treating my experience as isolated, unique. But here was evidence it had happened before, long before. Started wondering how long these things had been out there, watching us, waiting for drivers to take the wrong turn or stop at the wrong place. The old driver had theories. Said the highways we drive today follow older paths, Indian trails, trading routes, paths that existed before recorded history. Maybe what we encounter out there isn't new at all. Maybe it's always been here, and we're just passing through its territory. After that night, I started researching. Not the sensational stuff you find online, but real historical records. Found newspaper articles dating back to the 1950s, when the interstate system was first built. Reports of construction crews encountering things they couldn't explain. Workers refusing to continue in certain areas. Whole sections of planned highway mysteriously rerouted. Some of the older articles mentioned finding strange markers along survey routes. Rock piles decorated with bones and cloth. Just like what I saw in Montana. The article stopped abruptly in 1956. Like someone decided these stories shouldn't be public anymore. Mai's journal contains similar accounts from the 1960s and 70s. As highways spread across the country, so did the stories. Drivers disappearing, trucks found abandoned, strange lights and figures in the darkness. The details change, but the pattern remains the same. I've learned to recognize the warning signs now. The sudden radio interference, the way your GPS location jumps around or shows impossible coordinates, the feeling of being watched, even when you're the only vehicle for miles. Most importantly, I've learned when to turn around, when to find another route, no matter how many hours it adds to my journey. But there are others who haven't learned these lessons. New drivers, Mostly, they take the abandoned routes, ignore the warnings, stop at unmarked rest areas. Some get lucky. Others join the growing list in Mai's journal. The thing about trucking is, you develop instincts, little things that keep you alive. When to slow down before you see the ice. When to pull over before fatigue takes over. These instincts evolve, adapt to new threats. Mine certainly have. Take last month, for instance. I was hauling electronics through Arizona. Clear night. Good visibility. My regular route would have taken me past the petrified forest. But something felt off. Temperature gauge showed 72 degrees, but frost was forming on my mirrors. Radio picking up stations that shouldn't reach that far. All subtle signs I've learned to notice. Took a 2-hour detour instead. Later heard from another driver who'd taken the regular route that night. Said his truck's electrical system went completely dead in that stretch. No lights, no radio, no power. He rolled to a stop and spent 6 hours waiting for dawn, listening to something large circle his truck in the darkness. These incidents are becoming more frequent. Or maybe we're just getting better at recognizing them. Mai's journal is filling up faster these days. She started using different colored inks to track different types of encounters. Blue for disappearances, red for electrical failures, black for the things people see in their mirrors. The old driver I met in South Dakota keeps in touch. Sends me newspaper clippings from small towns along the highways. Stories that never make it to the major papers. Livestock mutilations near rest stops. Unexplained lights over remote stretches of road. Hikers finding strange markers in areas where the original highway surveys were done. I've started mapping these incidents myself. Not just recent ones, but historical cases too. Found patterns nobody else seems to have noticed. The encounters cluster around certain dates, certain phases of the moon, certain types of terrain. It's not random. There's a logic to it, if you know what to look for. Last week, I was at Mai's place again. She showed me something new in her journal. Polaroid photos from the 1980s, taken by drivers who'd passed through. They show those same rock cairns I saw in Montana, but in different locations. Different states, always by highways that were built on old trading routes or tribal paths. One photo caught my attention, taken in 1983, showing a cairn in Wyoming. In the background, barely visible, stands a figure, tall, impossibly tall. The photo's grainy, but you can make out enough detail to know it matches what I saw that night in Montana, what that old driver saw in 1976. Mai has a theory about why some of us survive these encounters while others disappear. Says it has to do with respect. The ones who make it are the ones who recognize the warning signs, who know when to turn back. The ones who disappear are the ones who push forward, thinking they can handle whatever's out there. I think she might be right. Every disappeared driver I've looked into had something in common. They all ignored the signs. The electrical failures, the GPS glitches, the strange marks by the roadside. They treated them as inconveniences rather than warnings. That's why I've started sharing what I know, but carefully. Not everything at once, just enough to help new drivers recognize the signs, to understand when that little voice in their head telling them to take another route isn't just paranoia. The highways connect more than just cities. They're like veins running through the country's history, linking past and present. And sometimes, when conditions are right, they connect to places that aren't on any map, places that maybe we were never meant to find. These days, I'm more cautious about which runs I accept. The money's not worth the risk when you know what's really out there. I stick to routes I've verified, stops I trust. Still do the occasional long haul, but only in daylight hours when possible. Mai passed away last spring. Heart attack, they said. Her daughter runs the stop now, keeps the coffee flowing just like her mother did. The journal stayed with the truck stop, Mai's final request. It's grown into 3 volumes now. Other drivers add to it, marking new incidents, updating old ones. A living record of things the official accident reports never mention. The old driver from South Dakota disappeared last winter. His truck was found idling at a rest stop in Wyoming. Engine running, coffee still warm in the cup holder. The police report listed it as another abandonment case. But I know better. Found his last logbook entry. He'd marked coordinates matching one of those locations from Mai's photos. He must have gone looking for answers, found something else instead. I sometimes wonder if I should do more. Take all this documentation, all these patterns we've discovered, make them public somehow. But then I remember what Mai told me. Knowledge protects those ready for it. Truth finds its way to those who need it. She was right. The drivers who need to know eventually find their way to that truck stop, to those journals. They learn to read the signs, to trust their instincts. The others? Maybe they're better off not knowing. This job's hard enough without carrying that weight. Last summer, I passed through Montana again. Different route, different season, but something pulled me toward that original spot. Found the turnout easily enough, hadn't changed much in all these years. The cairn was still there, weathered but standing. New threads tied around it, fresh bones on top. Someone's been maintaining it, standing there in the daylight. Everything looked different. The endless prairie grass, the distant mountains. Even the air felt normal, but I knew better. Took some photos, added them to Mai's journal. Future drivers might need to know this place. That's the thing about highways, they're never really empty. Every mile carries history, stories, warnings if you know how to read them. The broken white lines, the mile markers, the mysterious turnouts, they're all trying to tell us something. Most people speed past, focused on their destination, but some of us have learned to listen. I still drive, still make my deliveries, still keep my logbooks and maintain my truck. But I carry other knowledge now, passed down through Mai's journal, through whispered stories at truck stops, through hard-earned experience. Knowledge that keeps me alive, keeps other drivers alive. Sometimes, late at night when I'm parked at a trusted stop, I'll sit with my coffee and watch the trucks roll past. Wonder how many drivers out there are like me, carrying these secrets. How many have seen things they can't explain, found places that shouldn't exist, learned rules that aren't in any manual. The highways don't belong to us, never did. We're just passing through, moving our cargo from point A to point B, trying to stay on the right side of that invisible line between the world we know and the one we don't. Some nights, when the moon is full and the radio starts to static, that line gets awful thin, so I keep driving, keep watching, keep adding to Mai's journal when I find something new. Because out here, between the cities and towns, where the darkness swallows the highway and the only company is the hum of your engine, knowledge is the best protection we've got. They say every trucker has a story. Mine's still being written, 1 mile at a time. I don't know how it ends. But I know this much. As long as there are highways cutting through the empty places, as long as there are drivers willing to run those lonely routes, these stories will keep coming. Some will be explained away. Others will join the growing collection in those journals. And somewhere out there, in the spaces between map lines, in the gaps between radio stations, something is still waiting, still watching, still keeping pace with our trucks on empty highways, under starless skies. That's my story. Take from it what you will. But if you ever find yourself on a dark stretch of highway, instruments acting up, strange lights in your mirrors, remember what I've told you. Sometimes the longest way around is the safest way home. By the time I finally decided to write this down, 3 years had passed since that day in the Cibola National Forest. I've spent countless nights trying to convince myself it wasn't real, that what I saw was just a trick of light and shadow, maybe dehydration playing havoc with my mind. But the truth is, some experiences carve themselves so deep into your psyche that no amount of rationalization can smooth them away. My name's Elvin Archer. Back in 2021, I was just another working-class guy in Albuquerque, pulling double shifts at an auto repair shop and barely keeping my head above water. The recession had hit New Mexico hard, and between the rising rent and inflation, each month felt like a high-wire act without a safety net. The stress was eating me alive, turning my thoughts into an endless loop of bill calculations and worst-case scenarios. Hunting had always been my escape. There's something about the wilderness that strips away the artificial complications of modern life, reduces everything to its simplest form: survival, patience, skill. I'd been hunting since I was 12, Learned from my grandfather, who used to say that the forest would teach you everything you needed to know about life if you just shut up and listened. That October, when the pressure became too much, I decided to take a week off for a solo hunting trip. The Cibola National Forest was my destination of choice, a vast expanse of wilderness in northern New Mexico that I'd visited dozens of times before. The area I knew best was deep in the Carson National Forest section, where the terrain rises sharply into rugged mountains covered in dense pine and aspen forests. The elevation there ranges from 8 verso to 11,000 feet, and the landscape has a way of making you feel insignificant in the best possible way. I arrived at my usual camping spot just as the sun was setting on October 15th. The temperature was already dropping, typical for that time of year at that elevation. As I set up camp, something felt off. I've spent enough time in the wilderness to develop what some might call a sixth sense, though it's really just experience mixed with instinct. The forest felt wrong somehow. Too quiet. Too still. The first night, I barely slept. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves seemed amplified in the darkness. The wind had picked up around midnight, creating an eerie whistling as it threaded through the pine needles. By morning, my eyes were burning from exhaustion, but I forced myself to go through my usual routine. Coffee over the campfire, checking my gear, studying my topographical maps. I decided to push deeper into the forest that day, partly to scout for elk signs and partly to shake off the unease that had settled over me like a heavy blanket. The morning was crisp, with frost still clinging to the shadowed areas beneath the trees. My boots left clear prints in the partially frozen earth as I made my way up the ridge. The vegetation grew thicker as I climbed, the sun barely penetrating the canopy overhead. By early afternoon, I'd covered about 6 miles, marking my route on my GPS unit as I went. That's when I first noticed the smell, a sickly sweet odor that reminded me of rotting meat, but with an underlying chemical tang I couldn't place. It wasn't the normal smell of decay you sometimes encounter in the woods. This was different. Wrong somehow. My first thought was that I'd stumbled upon a kill site, maybe a mountain lion's leftover meal. But mountain lions typically drag their kills to covered areas, and this smell seemed to be coming from a more exposed location ahead. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. The clearing appeared suddenly, as if the forest had simply decided to step aside. What I found there still haunts my dreams. The elk carcass lay in the center, but it wasn't the normal clean kill you'd expect from a predator. This was something else entirely. The animal had been torn apart with surgical precision in some places and brutal force in others. The organs weren't simply spilled out. They were arranged in a pattern that seemed deliberately geometric, almost ritual-like. I've field-dressed countless animals over the years. I know what animal kills look like, how predators feed. This was different. This was methodical, purposeful. My hands were steady on my Remington 700 as I approached the carcass, but my heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. That's when the forest went silent, not the gradual quiet that comes when wildlife senses a predator, but an instant, absolute cessation of all sound. Even the wind seemed to die. The silence was so complete it felt like pressure against my eardrums. Movement caught my eye, something pale against the dark trees. At first, my mind tried to categorize it as a person, maybe another hunter. But as it emerged from the shadows, that rationalization crumbled. The thing that stepped into the clearing had only the most basic resemblance to human form, like a child's attempt to draw a person from description alone. It moved with an impossible fluidity, its limbs too long and jointed in ways that defied anatomy. The skin was a sickly pale gray, hairless and almost translucent in the filtered sunlight. But it was the face that broke something in my mind. The eyes were black, not just dark but absent of light entirely, and they held an intelligence that felt ancient and malevolent. The mouth, God. The mouth opened in what might have been a smile, revealing row upon row of needle-sharp teeth. I'd like to say I fired my rifle. I'd like to say I stood my ground. But the truth is, in that moment, every instinct screaming through my nervous system had a single message: run. And I did. I ran like I've never run before, crashing through underbrush, scrambling over fallen logs, My mind blank except for the primal need to put distance between myself and that thing. I don't know how long I ran. Long enough that my lungs were burning and my legs felt like lead. Long enough that when I finally tripped over an exposed root, twisting my ankle with a sickening pop, I could barely feel the pain through the adrenaline. I lay there for a moment, gasping for breath, waiting for those impossible fingers to close around my throat. But nothing came. The forest had resumed its normal sounds, birds calling, leaves rustling, the distant cry of a hawk. Whatever that thing was, it hadn't followed me. Or if it had chosen not to reveal itself. The trip back to camp was agony. My ankle had swollen to twice its normal size, and every step sent lightning bolts of pain up my leg. It took me nearly 4 hours to cover what should have been a 2-hour walk. By the time I reached my campsite, the sun was setting, and the temperature was plummeting. I should have packed up and left immediately, injured ankle or not. But the thought of trying to navigate those mountain roads in the dark, with that thing potentially out there, seemed even more dangerous than staying put. So I built up the fire as big as I dared, loaded my rifle, and settled in for the longest night of my life. Sleep wasn't an option. Every shadow held potential horrors. Every sound might have been those fluid footsteps approaching. I kept the fire blazing and my rifle close, watching the darkness beyond the circle of firelight with burning eyes. When dawn finally came, I broke camp in record time, leaving behind anything that wasn't absolutely essential. The drive home was a blur of paranoia and pain, constantly checking my rearview mirror for something I couldn't define. That was 3 years ago. I'd like to say I've moved on. That time has dulled the memory of what I saw in those woods. But some experiences change you fundamentally, alter the way you see the world. I still hunt, still spend time outdoors, but never alone now, and never in that part of the Cibola National Forest. I've spent countless hours researching what I encountered that day. The local Native American histories speak of creatures they call skinwalkers, beings that exist in the space between human and animal, natural and supernatural. The descriptions vary, but certain elements remain consistent: the pale skin, the wrongness of their movement, the intelligence in their eyes. I'm not asking you to believe me. Hell, most days I'm not sure I believe it myself. But I will say this: the next time you're out in the wilderness, and the forest goes quiet, and you get that feeling of being watched, don't ignore it. Our ancestors didn't survive by dismissing their instincts, and neither should we. Sometimes I wonder if it let me go on purpose that day, if whatever I encountered was playing with me, like a cat toying with a mouse. The thought keeps me awake some nights, staring at the shadows in my bedroom, wondering if those black eyes are watching me even now. Because here's the thing about encounters like this: they don't just end when you leave the forest. They follow you home in ways you can't explain. They change how you see the world, how you move through it. Every unexplained sound, every movement caught in your peripheral vision becomes a potential reminder that the world is bigger, stranger, and far more dangerous than we like to pretend. I still have the GPS coordinates of that clearing. Sometimes I'm tempted to go back, to prove to myself one way or another what really happened that day. But then I remember those eyes, that impossible smile, and I delete the coordinates again. Some questions are better left unanswered, some places better left unexplored. Because in the end, the most terrifying thing isn't what I saw in those woods. It's the certainty that whatever it was, it saw me too. And somewhere out there, in the vast wilderness of northern New Mexico, it remembers. The rain was hammering against my windshield as I pulled into the Peninsula College parking lot, checking my phone one last time before heading to class. It was October 2023, and between my part-time studies and the endless stream of delivery gigs, I was barely keeping my head above water. My name's Josh, and I'm still trying to make sense of what happened that day. I'd been scrolling through various gig apps during my break, looking for anything that could help cover next month's rent. Most jobs were the usual Port Angeles fare, helping retirees move furniture, picking up Costco orders for shut-ins, that sort of thing. But this posting caught my eye. The pay was exceptional, $750 for what seemed like a straightforward pickup and delivery job. A client needed some archival materials transported from a climate-controlled storage unit to their private residence near Forks. The listing emphasized careful handling and included specific instructions about temperature control and avoiding direct sunlight. Looking back, those requirements should have raised red flags. But when you're 26, trying to balance college with paying bills, and your GI Bill benefits are running low, you tend to focus on the dollar signs rather than the warning signs. I'd spent 4 years in the Army before starting college, mostly doing logistics work. Nothing glamorous, just moving supplies from point A to point B, making sure everything was accounted for. That experience, plus 3 years of various delivery gigs while studying, made me confident I could handle whatever this job entailed. The storage facility was one of those newer places on the outskirts of Port Angeles. All gleaming metal and keypad entries. Unit 247 was climate-controlled. Just like the listing specified, inside, I found a single crate, roughly the size of a dining room table, wrapped meticulously in thick moving blankets and secured with professional-grade straps. A handwritten note attached to it read, "Handle with extreme care. Keep temperature stable. Delivery instructions enclosed." The crate was heavier than it looked, but I managed to load it into my truck's covered bed without too much trouble. The enclosed instructions provided detailed directions to a location off Highway 101, about 15 miles outside of Forks. As I pulled out of the storage facility, the rain intensified, and the October darkness seemed to press in around my headlights. I tried calling the client, someone named Dr. Ravencroft, but my phone showed no service. Typical for that stretch of road, but something about it made me uneasy. The Olympic Mountains loomed to my right, barely visible through the sheets of rain and low-hanging clouds that seemed to crawl down their slopes like living things. The turnoff came sooner than expected, an unmarked logging road that twisted away from the highway into the depths of the forest. The trees here were ancient, their massive trunks disappearing into the gloom above, branches draped with moss that moved in ways that made me question whether it was just the wind. My truck's suspension protested as I navigated the rutted path. There were no fresh tire tracks in the mud, and fallen branches crackled under my wheels. The job posting had mentioned regular deliveries to this address, but everything about this road suggested it hadn't seen traffic in months, maybe years. The house appeared suddenly through the rain and gathering darkness. A 2-story Victorian that might have been impressive once, but now looked like something from a ghost town. The white paint was peeling, revealing weather-beaten wood underneath. A decrepit pickup truck sat in what passed for a driveway, its wheels half buried in the earth as if it had been slowly sinking for decades. I killed the engine, and the silence that followed was absolute. No birds, no wind in the trees, not even the usual forest sounds, just the tick of my cooling engine and the drumming of rain on the truck's roof. The crate in the back seemed to have its own presence, like a black hole pulling at my attention. Standard procedure for these deliveries was simple. Try calling the client again, still no signal. Then knock and wait 5 minutes before leaving a delivery attempt notice. I grabbed my flashlight, standard equipment for rural deliveries, and approached the front porch. Each step on the weathered board sent echoes through the structure that seemed too loud, too hollow. The brass knocker was green with age. I rapped it 3 times, the sound reverberating through the house like it was empty. While waiting, I noticed strange markings carved into the doorframe. Not the typical height measurements parents make for growing kids, but angular symbols that seemed to shift when viewed directly. That's when I heard it, a scraping sound from inside, like something heavy being dragged across wooden floors. I announced myself as the delivery driver, trying to keep my voice professional and steady. The scraping stopped, replaced by a wet, clicking sound that reminded me of the time I'd found a trapped animal in my garage.
Hello?
Delivery for Dr. Ravencroft? The clicking grew louder, accompanied by an odor that crept under the door, like formaldehyde and something else, something that triggered every primitive warning signal in my brain. My army training kicked in, every instinct screaming danger, but I was already reaching for the door handle, my body moving on autopilot while my mind screamed to run. The door opened with a groan that seemed to come from the house itself. The interior was a cavity of darkness, broken only by my flashlight beam. The beam caught dust motes dancing in the stale air, and something else, movement in the darkness beyond. The living room was a museum of abandonment, furniture draped in yellowed sheets, water stains tracking down wallpaper that might have been elegant once. The scratching sound resumed, closer now. My light picked out details I still see in my nightmares, deep gouges in the hardwood floor, like something with immense strength had been pacing. Dark stains that might have been water damage, might have been something worse. And there, in the corner behind what looked like a covered piano, something moved. It unfolded itself from the shadows in a way that defied physics. I'd seen plenty of strange things during my time in the army. Night vision plays tricks on you. Exhaustion makes you see things that aren't there. But this was different. Its proportions were wrong, like someone had taken human dimensions and stretched them past their breaking point. The skin was a patchwork of grays, some areas smooth as marble, others textured like tree bark. Where its face should have been, there were only points of light, like stars reflecting in oil. In what passed for its hands, it held something that looked organic, wet and red and wrong. The thing's head snapped toward me with a sound like vertebrae grinding together, and its mouth. Christ. Its mouth opened vertically, revealing rows of crystalline structures that might have been teeth. My flashlight slipped from numb fingers, clattering across the floor. The beam spun like a spotlight in a nightmare carnival, illuminating the thing in stuttering flashes. It made a sound, not a roar or a growl, but a high, thin whine like medical equipment flatlining. Then it moved. Military training kicks in when your conscious mind freezes. I stumbled backward, my hand finding something solid, a fireplace poker leaning against the wall. The creature closed the distance in a single fluid movement, its breath carrying that chemical stink mixed with something older, something that smelled like deep earth and decay. Pure survival instinct took over. I swung the poker with everything I had. The metal connected with a sound like hitting wet clay. The creature reeled back, that keening sound rising to a pitch that shattered a nearby window. I didn't wait to see if I'd done any real damage. I ran, ducking under a swipe from one of its limbs that took chunks out of the doorframe. My truck was still running. Thank God I'd left the keys in the ignition. I threw myself into the cab as something heavy landed on the hood, leaving dents in the metal like someone had dropped a boulder on it. The creature's face appeared at my windshield, that vertical mouth opening wider than any mouth should. I slammed the truck into reverse, tires spinning in the mud before finding purchase. The thing clung on until I hit the main road, then launched itself off with impossible grace, disappearing into the forest faster than anything that size should be able to move. I didn't slow down until I hit Port Angeles city limits, back in the relative safety of streetlights and civilization. I remembered the crate. It had broken open during my escape, spilling its contents across my truck bed. What I saw in there, they weren't antiques. Not really. They were things made to look like antiques, crafted from materials I don't want to think about. Each piece had a certain wrongness to it. Dolls with faces that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. Books bound in leather that felt too soft, too warm. And they smelled like that thing in the house, formaldehyde and decay. I went to the police, of course, showed them the dents in my truck, told them about the house. They searched the area but found nothing. No Victorian mansion, no evidence of recent activity. The road I'd turned down didn't exist on any map. The client's information led nowhere, and the gig app showed no record of the job. But they did tell me something that still keeps me up at night. Over the past 50 years, dozens of people have gone missing in that part of the Olympic Peninsula, mostly hikers and backpackers, but also delivery drivers, surveyors, anyone who might have reason to venture deep into those woods alone. The local tribes have stories about things that live in the darker parts of the forest, things that wear human shapes like ill-fitting suits, that hunger for more than just flesh. I dropped out of Peninsula College after that. Couldn't handle being so close to those mountains anymore. Moved to Eastern Washington, took online classes instead. Sometimes I dream about that house, about the thing I met there. In my dreams, I see those star-bright eyes watching me from the woods beyond my window. And sometimes, when I'm driving at night, and pass a certain stretch of Highway 101. I swear I can hear that high, keening sound coming from the trees. The police never found any trace of Dr. Ravencroft or the archival materials, but every few months, I read about another disappearance in the Olympic Peninsula, and I wonder if that thing is still out there, still collecting, still crafting its horrible artifacts from whoever it finds in the forest. I've told this story to a few people over the years. Most don't believe me, and that's fine. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't lived it. But if you're ever driving through the Olympics, especially at night, and you see an unmarked road that seems to wind deeper into the forest than it should, keep driving. Some deliveries aren't worth making. The money from that job is still in my account, $750 that I've never touched. I've thought about donating it to charity, but somehow that feels wrong, like spending blood money. So it sits there, a digital reminder that some things in this world don't fit into our neat categories of real and unreal. I work in IT now, safe behind a desk with 4 walls and fluorescent lights. But sometimes, when I'm alone in the server room late at night, I catch a whiff of that chemical smell, that reek of decay, and I know, somewhere in those ancient forests, something is watching, waiting, hungry for its next delivery. They say the Olympic Peninsula is one of the last truly wild places in the lower 48. After what I experienced, I believe it. But wild doesn't quite capture it. There's something else out there, something older than the forests themselves, and it's patient. Oh God, is it patient? The rain was coming down in sheets when I got the notification for the job. October 2019, and I was desperate enough to take anything that would help cover next semester's tuition at Peninsula College. Call me Wyatt. Might as well know the name of the guy who lived to tell this story, right? I was scrolling through one of those gig apps, the kind where people post random jobs they need done. Most of them were the usual, helping someone move, picking up furniture, that sort of thing. But this one caught my eye. The pay was good, almost too good for what seemed like a simple pickup and delivery job. Some lady out near Forks needed an antique collection, moved from a storage unit to her house. The listing specifically mentioned handling with care and included detailed instructions about not exposing the items to direct sunlight. Weird. But I figured rich collectors always had their quirks. The storage unit was in Port Angeles. Nothing special about it. Standard metal door, concrete floor, fluorescent lights that flickered just enough to give you a headache. The unit itself contained just one large wooden crate, about the size of a coffee table, wrapped in thick moving blankets and secured with rope. It was heavier than it looked, but I managed to get it into my truck without too much trouble. The drive out to Forks started normally enough. The Olympics loomed to my right, their peaks hidden in low clouds that seemed to crawl down the mountainsides like ghostly fingers. I'd made this drive dozens of times before, but something felt different that day. The clouds hung lower than usual, pressing down on the landscape like a wet wool blanket, and the forest seemed to lean in toward the road. I tried calling the client when I was about halfway there, but my phone showed no service. Typical for that stretch, but it still made me uneasy. I'd sent a joking text earlier about twilight vampires when I still had bars, but now the joke felt flat. The silence in the truck cab grew heavier with each mile. The turnoff came sooner than I expected. An unmarked dirt road that twisted away from Highway 101 into the depths of the forest. The trees here were old, their trunks wider than my truck, draped in moss that hung like tattered burial shrouds. The afternoon light barely penetrated the canopy, creating a perpetual twilight even though it was barely 3 p.m. The rain was coming down in sheets when I got the notification for the job. October 2019, and I was desperate enough to take anything that would help cover next semester's tuition at Peninsula College. Call me Wyatt. Might as well know the name of the guy who lived to tell this story, right? I was scrolling through one of those gig apps, the kind where people post random jobs they need done. Most of them were the usual, helping someone move, picking up furniture, that sort of thing. But this one caught my eye. The pay was good, almost too good for what seemed like a simple pick-up and delivery job. Some lady out near Forks needed an antique collection moved from a storage unit to her house. The listing specifically mentioned handling with care and included detailed instructions about not exposing the items to direct sunlight. Weird. But I figured rich collectors always had their quirks. The storage unit was in Port Angeles. Nothing special about it. Standard metal door, concrete floor, fluorescent lights that flickered just enough to give you a headache. The unit itself contained just one large wooden crate, about the size of a coffee table, wrapped in thick moving blankets and secured with rope. It was heavier than it looked, but I managed to get it into my truck without too much trouble. The drive out to Forks started normally enough. The Olympics loomed to my right, their peaks hidden in low clouds that seemed to crawl down the mountainsides like ghostly fingers. I'd made this drive dozens of times before, but something felt different that day. The clouds hung lower than usual, pressing down on the landscape like a wet wool blanket, and the forest seemed to lean in toward the road. I tried calling the client when I was about halfway there, but my phone showed no service. Typical for that stretch, but it still made me uneasy. I'd sent a joking text earlier about Twilight vampires when I still had bars, but now the joke felt flat. The silence in the truck cab grew heavier with each mile. The turnoff came sooner than I expected. An unmarked dirt road that twisted away from Highway 101 into the depths of the forest. The trees here were old, their trunks wider than my truck, draped in moss that hung like tattered burial shrouds. The afternoon light barely penetrated the canopy, creating a perpetual twilight even though it was barely 3 p.m. My truck's suspension groaned as I navigated the rutted path. No fresh tire tracks marked the mud, and fallen branches cracked under my wheels. Something wasn't adding up. The job listing had mentioned regular deliveries, but this road looked unused for months, maybe years. I'd been doing delivery gigs for 3 years by then, working my way through college. Started with pizza and graduated to courier services, furniture delivery. Whatever paid, the money helped supplement my GI Bill benefits. 4 years in the Marines had taught me enough about following orders and trusting my gut. Right now, my gut was screaming that something was wrong. The house materialized out of the gloom like a rotting tooth, a 2-story Victorian that might have been white once, but now wore a coat of green-black mold and moss. A rusted Ford pickup sat in what passed for a driveway, its tires sunk into the earth like it had been there for decades. The windows were dark, some boarded over, others reflecting the dim forest light like dead eyes. I pulled up and killed the engine. The silence that followed was absolute. No birds, no wind in the trees. Nothing. Just the tick of my cooling engine and my own breathing. The crate in the back seemed to pulse with its own gravity, drawing my attention like a black hole. Protocol said I should try calling the client again. No signal? Of course. Next step was to knock and wait 5 minutes before leaving a delivery attempt notice. Simple enough. I grabbed my flashlight, standard equipment for rural deliveries, and approached the front porch. Each step on the weathered boards sent creaks echoing through the structure. The brass knocker was green with verdigris. I rapped it 3 times, the sound hollow and wrong in the dead air. While I waited, I noticed strange markings carved into the doorframe. Not the usual height measurements parents make for growing kids, but angular symbols that made my eyes hurt if I looked at them too long. That's when I heard it, a scratching sound from inside, like something being dragged across wooden floors. I called out, announcing myself as the delivery driver, trying to keep my voice steady. The scratching stopped, replaced by a wet, clicking sound that reminded me of the time I'd found a possum trapped in my garage. Hello? Delivery for Mrs. Ravenscroft? My voice sounded thin, childish. The clicking grew louder, accompanied by a smell that crept under the door, rotting meat and something chemical, like formaldehyde. My Marine training kicked in, every nerve screaming danger. But I was already reaching for the door handle, my body moving on autopilot while my mind screamed to run. The door swung open with a groan that seemed to come from the house itself. The interior was a cavity of shadows, furniture draped in sheets like abstract ghosts. My flashlight beam caught dust motes dancing in the air, and something else, movement in the darkness beyond. The scratching resumed, closer now. My light picked out details I wish I could forget. long furrows in the wooden floor, like something with claws had been pacing, dark stains that might have been oil, might have been blood. And there, in the corner of what must have been a living room, something moved. It unfolded itself from behind a sheet-covered armchair, rising to a height that shouldn't have been possible, given the ceiling. Its movements were wrong, joints bending in impossible directions, like a spider made of human parts. The skin was a patchwork of gray and darker gray, stretched too tight in some places, loose and rotting in others. Where its eyes should have been, there were only gleaming points of light, like stars reflected in oil. In its hands, if you could call them hands, it held something long and red-streaked. I didn't want to think about what it was. The thing's head snapped toward me with a sound like cracking vertebrae. And its mouth, God. Its mouth opened vertically, splitting its face like a blooming flower made of teeth. I dropped the flashlight. It hit the floor with a crack, the beam spinning across the room like a spotlight in a nightmare carnival. The creature made a sound, not a roar or a screech, but a high, thin whine like medical equipment flatling. Then it moved. I stumbled backward, tripping over something solid, an old trunk or chest. My hand found something nearby, something with weight and a wooden handle. The creature was on me in an instant, its breath hot and rancid, those star-bright eyes filling my vision. Pure instinct took over. I swung whatever I'd grabbed, an axe. I realized later, with every ounce of strength I had. The blade connected with a sound like an overripe melon splitting. The creature reeled back, keening at a frequency that shattered a nearby window. I didn't wait to see if I'd hurt it badly. I ran, ducking under a swipe from one of its limbs that took chunks out of the doorframe. My truck was still running. Thank God I'd left the keys in the ignition. I threw myself into the cab as something heavy landed on the hood, leaving dents in the metal. The creature's face appeared at my windshield, that vertical mouth opening to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. I slammed the truck into reverse, tires spinning in the mud before finding purchase. The thing held on until I hit the main road, then leapt off with inhuman grace, disappearing into the forest faster than anything that size should move. I didn't slow down until I hit Port Angeles city limits. It was only then that I remembered the crate. It had broken open during my escape, spilling its contents across my truck bed. What I saw in there, they weren't dolls. Not really. They were things made to look like dolls, crafted from materials I don't want to think about. Each one had a face frozen in an expression of agony, and they smelled like death and chemicals. I went to the police. Of course. They searched the area but found nothing. No house. No creature. No evidence. The road I'd turned down didn't exist on any map. The client's information led nowhere. The payment app showed no record of the job. But they did tell me something that still keeps me up at night. Over the past 50 years, dozens of people have gone missing in that part of the Olympic Peninsula. Hikers, mostly, but also delivery drivers, surveyors, anyone who might have reason to venture deep into those woods alone. The local tribes have stories about things that live in the darker parts of the forest, things that wear human shapes like ill-fitting suits, that hunger for more than just flesh. I quit delivery work after that. Went back to school full-time, took out loans instead. Sometimes I dream about that house, about the thing I met there. In my dreams, I see those star-bright eyes watching me from the woods beyond my bedroom window. And sometimes, when I'm driving at night and pass a certain stretch of Highway 101, I swear I can hear scratching coming from the trees. The police never found any trace of Mrs. Ravenscroft or her antique collection. But every few months, I read about another disappearance in the Olympic Peninsula, and I wonder if that thing is still out there, still collecting, still crafting its horrible dolls from whoever it finds in the forest. I don't go near Forks anymore, but sometimes, on rainy nights when the wind comes down from the mountains, I catch a whiff of that chemical smell, that reek of decay, and I know, somewhere in those ancient forests, something is watching, waiting, hungry for its next delivery. I never wanted to tell this story. For 13 years, I've carried it inside me like a splinter, working its way toward my heart. But after what happened last month, another disappearance. Same area, same circumstances, I can't stay silent anymore. People need to know what's out there. My name is Marcus Chen. In 2011, I was working as a park ranger in Olympic National Forest, Washington State. I'd taken the job fresh out of college, drawn by the promise of solitude among those ancient trees. The Olympic Forest isn't like other woods. There's something primordial about it. The moss hangs from the branches like tattered curtains, and the ferns grow chest-high in places. The green there is deeper than anywhere else I've seen, almost black in the shadows. Most people find it oppressive, but for an introvert like me, it felt like home. I'd been there 3 years when it happened. July 4th, 2011, a day I'll never forget. Most of my colleagues had taken the holiday off, but I volunteered for the solo shift. Holidays meant crowds at the beaches and barbecues in the designated areas, leaving the deeper trails relatively quiet. Perfect for someone like me who preferred the company of trees to people. The morning passed uneventfully. I checked on a few campsites, redirected some hikers who'd strayed off the marked trails, and documented a fallen tree blocking one of the lesser-used paths. Standard stuff. But there had been reports of unusual activity in the previous weeks. Hikers claiming to see something moving in the undergrowth, always just at the edge of their vision. The official line was bears, but something about the descriptions didn't quite fit. The call came at 6:43 p.m. The sun was already starting its descent behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and blood red. The woman's voice crackled over my radio, panic making her words tumble over each other. Please, you have to help. My partner's missing. We were on the Moonridge Trail, and he's just gone. I tried to keep her calm as I gathered the details. Her name was Sarah Martinez, and her hiking partner was Dr. James Sullivan, a geology professor from Seattle. They'd been collecting rock samples for his research when they'd had what she called a stupid argument about which path to take back. James had stormed off ahead, and Sarah had assumed he was just blowing off steam. That was almost 2 hours ago. He knows these trails, she insisted, her voice cracking. He's been doing research here for years. He wouldn't just get lost. Something in her tone set off warning bells. I've handled dozens of missing person reports over the years, but this felt different. There was a note of raw terror in her voice that went beyond normal concern. I found Sarah at the Moonridge Trailhead parking lot, pacing between the few remaining cars. The setting sun cast long shadows through the trees, and the temperature had dropped enough to make her shiver in her light hiking jacket. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with short dark hair and the lean build of a serious hiker. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying. Thank God, she breathed when she saw my truck pull up. Please, we have to find him. I know something's wrong. I can feel it. I grabbed my gear, flashlight, first aid kit, radio, emergency flares. Standard procedure said I should wait for backup. But something in Sarah's desperation moved me. Show me where you last saw him, I said. We started up the trail, Sarah calling James's name every few minutes. Only the wind answered, rustling through the canopy overhead. As darkness crept in, I switched on my flashlight. Its beam seemed weak against the pressing darkness of the forest. About a mile in, Sarah grabbed my arm. There, his backpack. Off to the side of the trail, partially hidden by a fallen log, lay a olive-green hiking pack. My blood ran cold as I approached it. Everything was still in place. Water bottle, sample bags, field notebook. No signs of animal interference or struggle, but something felt deeply wrong about the scene. It was too neat, like it had been placed there deliberately. A branch snapped in the darkness beyond the trail. Sarah jumped, pressing close to my side. I swept the flashlight beam toward the sound, and that's when I saw it. Just for a moment, caught in the edge of the light, a figure, too tall to be human, its proportions all wrong. Pale, almost white skin stretched over an emaciated frame, with arms that hung almost to the ground. The head was small, almost childlike, perched on that elongated body. But the eyes, God, the eyes. They caught the flashlight beam and reflected it back like a cat's, glowing amber in the darkness. It moved with an unnatural grace, more flowing than walking, and vanished into the undergrowth before I could properly process what I'd seen. Sarah's fingernails dug into my arm. "Did you?" she whispered. "We need to move." I cut her off. "Now, stay behind me!" What followed was the longest 20 minutes of my life. We could hear it paralleling our path through the woods, always just out of sight. The sound of branches cracking, leaves rustling, and occasionally, worst of all, a low, wet breathing that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Twice more I caught glimpses of it. The second time, I saw its hands, if you could call them that. The fingers were too long, ending in curved claws that looked like shards of obsidian. The third time, it was closer, and I saw its mouth. That image still haunts my nightmares, a lipless gash filled with needle-thin teeth, stretched in what might have been a smile. We didn't run. Every instinct screamed at me to sprint for safety, but I knew that would be fatal. Instead, we maintained a steady pace, my flashlight beam sweeping back and forth across the trail ahead. The parking lot lights appeared through the trees like a miracle, and only then did we break into a run. We burst out of the forest and collapsed on the asphalt, gasping. Other rangers arrived minutes later, drawn by Sarah's hysterical sobs. I tried to explain what we'd seen, but the words sounded insane even to my own ears. They organized a search party, of course, combed the woods for hours with dogs and thermal cameras. They found nothing, no tracks, no blood, no sign of James or the creature we'd seen. The official report listed it as a probable animal attack, possibly a bear. They suggested the stress and poor lighting had made us imagine the details. Sarah was dismissed as hysterical. Thus, I was strongly encouraged to take some leave. What could I say? That I'd seen something impossible? That whatever took James wasn't anything known to science? I quit the ranger service a month later. Took a job in Seattle doing logistics for a shipping company. I couldn't face those woods again, knowing what lurked in their depths. Sarah and I stayed in touch for a while, sharing our mutual trauma, but eventually drifted apart. Last I heard, she'd moved to Arizona, about as far from dense forests as you can get. But I can't escape it entirely. Every time I see a news report about another missing hiker, my gut clenches. I wonder how many others have encountered that thing. How many disappearances blamed on animals or exposure were really something else entirely. Last month's incident brought it all flooding back. Another hiker vanished from the same area, leaving behind a neatly placed backpack. The forums are buzzing with theories: Bigfoot, Skinwalkers, aliens. But I know what's out there. I've seen it with my own eyes, heard its breathing, felt its hunger. They should rename it the Snare, that part of the Olympic forest, because that's what it does. Draws you in with its beauty, its promise of solitude, until you're too far from safety to escape. Whatever that creature is, it's patient, it's territorial, and it's still hunting. I don't expect you to believe me. Most days, I'm not sure I believe it myself. But if you're planning a hike in the Olympics, especially around Moonridge Trail, please stick to the marked paths. Don't go alone. And if you feel eyes on you, if you hear something moving just out of sight, if you see a flash of pale skin in the shadows, run. Run as fast as you can, and pray it isn't already too late, because in those deep woods, where the moss hangs like funeral shrouds and the ferns whisper secrets to the wind, something is waiting, something that was never meant to be seen by human eyes, and once it chooses you, it never lets go. The rain was coming down in sheets when I got the notification for the job. November 2021, and I was desperate enough to take anything that would help cover next semester's tuition at Peninsula College. I'm writing this down now, 2 years later, because I need someone to know what happened out there in the Olympic forests. My name's Declan, and I'm still trying to make sense of what I saw that day. I was 24 then, fresh out of the Marines where I'd spent 4 years doing logistics work. Nothing glamorous, just moving supplies from point A to point B, making sure everything was accounted for. The military had taught me discipline and attention to detail, traits that served me well in civilian life, or so I thought. Between classes and the endless stream of delivery gigs, I was barely keeping my head above water. The GI Bill helped, but Port Angeles isn't cheap, even with roommates. That's why the job posting caught my eye. $800 for what seemed like a straightforward pickup and delivery. Some client needed research materials transported from a climate-controlled storage unit to their residence near Forks. The listing emphasized careful handling and included specific instructions about temperature control and avoiding direct sunlight. Looking back, those requirements should have raised red flags. But when you're trying to balance college with paying bills, you tend to focus on the dollar signs rather than the warning signs. The storage facility was one of those newer places off Highway 101, all gleaming metal and electronic keypads. The November rain made the place look slick and hostile under the fluorescent lights. Unit 317 was climate-controlled, just like the listing specified. I punched in the code I'd been given, hearing the lock disengage with a click that seemed too loud in the empty corridor. Inside, I found a single crate, roughly the size of a dining room table, wrapped meticulously in thick moving blankets and secured with professional-grade straps. A handwritten note attached to it read, "Handle with extreme care. Temperature-sensitive materials. Delivery instructions enclosed." The handwriting was precise, almost mechanical in its perfection. The crate was heavier than it looked, but I managed to load it into my truck's covered bed without too much trouble. The enclosed instructions provided detailed directions to a location off Highway 101, about 15 miles outside of Forks. As I pulled out of the storage facility, the rain intensified, and the November darkness seemed to press in around my headlights. My truck's GPS kept losing signal as I headed west. I tried calling the client, someone named Dr. Ravencroft, but my phone showed no service. Typical for that stretch of road. But something about it made me uneasy. The Olympic Mountains loomed to my right, barely visible through the sheets of rain and low-hanging clouds that seemed to crawl down their slopes like living things. The turnoff came sooner than expected. An unmarked logging road that twisted away from the highway into the depths of the forest. The trees here were ancient, their massive trunks disappearing into the gloom above, branches draped with moss that moved in ways that made me question whether it was just the wind. My truck's suspension protested as I navigated the rutted path. There were no fresh tire tracks in the mud, and fallen branches crackled under my wheels. The job posting had mentioned regular deliveries to this address, but everything about this road suggested it hadn't seen traffic in months, maybe years. My Marine training was kicking in, that heightened awareness of surroundings, the instinctive cataloging of possible threats and escape routes. Something felt wrong here. Fundamentally wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. The house appeared suddenly through the rain and gathering darkness. A 2-story Victorian that might have been impressive once, but now looked like something from a ghost town. The white paint was peeling, revealing weather-beaten wood underneath. A decrepit pickup truck sat in what passed for a driveway, its wheels half buried in the earth as if it had been slowly sinking for decades. I killed the engine, and the silence that followed was absolute. No birds, no wind in the trees, not even the usual forest sounds. Just the tick of my cooling engine and the drumming of rain on the truck's roof. The crate in the back seemed to have its own presence, like a black hole pulling at my attention. Standard procedure for these deliveries was simple. Try calling the client again, still no signal, then knock and wait 5 minutes before leaving a delivery attempt notice. I grabbed my flashlight, standard equipment for rural deliveries, and approached the front porch. Each step on the weathered boards sent echoes through the structure that seemed too loud, too hollow. The brass knocker was green with age. I rapped it 3 times, the sound reverberating through the house like it was empty. While waiting, I noticed strange markings carved into the doorframe. Not the typical height measurements parents make for growing kids, but angular symbols that seemed to shift when viewed directly. That's when I heard it, a scraping sound from inside, like something heavy being dragged across wooden floors. I announced myself as the delivery driver, trying to keep my voice professional and steady. The scraping stopped, replaced by a wet, clicking sound that reminded me of the time I'd found a trapped animal in my garage. "Hello? Delivery for Dr. Ravencroft?" The clicking grew louder, accompanied by an odor that crept under the door, like formaldehyde and something else. something that triggered every primitive warning signal in my brain. My military training kicked in, every instinct screaming danger. But I was already reaching for the door handle, my body moving on autopilot while my mind screamed to run. The door swung open with a groan that seemed to come from the house itself. The interior was a cavity of shadows, furniture draped in sheets like abstract ghosts. My flashlight beam caught dust motes dancing in the air, and something else, movement in the darkness beyond. The scraping resumed, closer now. My light picked out details I wish I could forget. Long furrows in the wooden floor, like something with claws had been pacing. Dark stains that might have been water damage, might have been something else. And there, in the corner of what must have been a living room, something moved. It unfolded itself from behind a sheet-covered chair, rising to a height that shouldn't have been possible given the ceiling. Its movements were wrong, joints bending in impossible directions, like a spider made of human parts. The skin was a patchwork of gray and darker gray, stretched too tight in some places, loose and rotting in others. Where its eyes should have been, there were only gleaming points of light, like stars reflected in oil. In its hands, if you could call them hands, it held something that looked disturbingly like medical instruments, their metal surfaces stained dark. The thing's head snapped toward me with a sound like cracking vertebrae, and its mouth. God. Its mouth opened vertically, splitting its face like a blooming flower made of teeth. I dropped the flashlight. It hit the floor with a crack, the beam spinning across the room like a spotlight in a nightmare carnival. The creature made a sound, not a roar or a screech, but a high, thin whine like medical equipment flatling. Then it moved. My combat training took over. I didn't think. I reacted. As the thing lunged, I grabbed the nearest object, an old fireplace poker leaning against the wall, and swung with every ounce of strength I had. The iron connected with a sound like wet cardboard tearing. The creature reeled back, keening at a frequency that made my teeth vibrate. I didn't wait to see if I'd hurt it badly. I ran, ducking under a swipe from one of its limbs that took chunks out of the doorframe. My truck was still running. Thank God I'd left the keys in the ignition. I threw myself into the cab as something heavy landed on the hood, leaving dents in the metal. The creature's face appeared at my windshield, that vertical mouth opening to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. I slammed the truck into reverse, tires spinning in the mud before finding purchase. The thing held on until I hit the main road, then leaped off with inhuman grace, disappearing into the forest faster than anything that size should move. I didn't slow down until I hit Port Angeles city limits. The crate had broken open during my escape, spilling its contents across my truck bed. What I saw in there, they weren't research materials. They were specimens. Human specimens, preserved in ways that defied medical science. Each container was labeled with dates and locations, all corresponding to missing persons cases in the Olympic Peninsula over the past decade. I went to the police, of course, showed them the specimens, told them everything. They searched the area but found nothing, no house, no creature, no evidence. The road I'd turned down didn't exist on any map. The client's information led nowhere, and the payment app showed no record of the job. But they did find something that still keeps me up at night. Over the past 50 years, dozens of people have gone missing in that part of the Olympic Peninsula. Hikers, mostly, but also delivery drivers, surveyors, anyone who might have reason to venture deep into those woods alone. The local tribes have stories about things that live in the darker parts of the forest, things that wear human shapes like ill-fitting suits, that collect specimens for purposes we can't comprehend. The police investigation went nowhere. The specimens I'd recovered vanished from evidence storage within a week. The official report cited contamination and disposal of biohazardous materials. But I know better. Whatever that thing was, it had connections, influence. It had been operating for years, maybe decades, using modern technology, delivery apps, storage units, electronic payments to lure in its specimens. I quit delivery work after that, went back to school full-time, took out loans instead. Sometimes I dream about that house, about the thing I met there. In my dreams, I see those star-bright eyes watching me from the woods beyond my bedroom window. And sometimes, when I'm driving at night and pass a certain stretch of Highway 101, I swear I can hear that wet clicking sound coming from the trees. The police never found any trace of Dr. Ravencroft or the other specimens. But every few months, I read about another disappearance in the Olympic Peninsula, and I wonder if that thing is still out there, still collecting, still preserving pieces of people for its own unknowable purposes. I don't go near Forks anymore. But sometimes, on rainy nights when the wind comes down from the mountains, I catch a whiff of that chemical smell, that reek of decay and formaldehyde. And I know, somewhere in those ancient forests, something is watching, waiting, hungry for its next delivery. Last week, I got another notification on my phone, a new delivery app I'd never heard of, offering exceptional pay for a simple pickup and delivery job. The client's name was different, but the instructions were the same: temperature control, no direct sunlight. I deleted the app immediately, but I know it's only a matter of time before someone else takes that job. Someone else drives down that unmarked road, thinking about the money, not seeing the warnings until it's too late. And there's nothing I can do to stop it, because who would believe me? In a world of smartphones and GPS, who would believe there are still things in the dark places of the world? Things that have learned to use our technology against us? Things that understand that the best way to hunt in the modern world is to make their prey come to them. I'm writing this down as a warning, I suppose, to anyone who might get that notification, who might see that too-good-to-be-true job offer. Check the details, look for the patterns, and if you find yourself on a lonely road in the Olympic Peninsula, rain drumming on your roof, darkness pressing in around you, turn back. Turn back before you hear that clicking sound, before you see those star-bright eyes, because once you do, it's already too late.